Night settles over the desert like a slow-moving tide, swallowing the last traces of daylight until only the silhouettes of dunes remain. The excavation site lies quiet except for the soft clatter of tools being packed away and the low hum of a generator struggling against the cold wind. Most of the team has already turned in, retreating to their tents with notebooks full of pottery shards and catalog numbers. But a few remain, drawn not by routine, but by the strange arrangement of stones half buried in the sand, a formation that no one can quite explain. Even under the harsh floodlights, the structure feels older than anything around it, older even than the earliest cities that once dotted this plain. The lead archaeologist stands over the circular platform, brushing away the last thin layer of dust. The ground beneath feels unnaturally smooth, as if polished not by human hands but by something far more deliberate. A ring of stone slabs forms a perfect curve, too perfect. No ancient Mesopotamian site has ever revealed geometry this exact. The air stirs suddenly, carrying with it the faint scent of something metallic, something reminiscent of ozone before a lightning strike. The archaeologist pauses, frowning at the sensation prickling across the skin. Tools laid neatly in the sand begin to tremble, their metallic handles vibrating softly as though stirred by an unseen pulse. A compass on the ground spins once, twice, then collapses into stillness. The team members exchange uneasy glances. They've experienced odd phenomena before: electrical interference, dust storms, faulty equipment, but never anything like this. One whispers that the ground feels warm beneath their boots. Another swears they heard a low hum rising from the circle, though no machine is running nearby. In a place where temperatures plummet at night, warmth seeping through the sand is unsettling. Someone laughs nervously and dismisses it as heat trapped below the surface. No one believes him. As the archaeologist kneels and traces a finger along the innermost stone ring, grains of sand shift to reveal markings, symbols etched with impossible precision. These aren't cuneiform. They aren't linear script, pictographic carvings, or anything that matches known proto-writing. Instead, the symbols resemble spirals, stars, and repeating arcs, the kind found only in the earliest mythic depictions of cosmic order. The shapes seem to flow into one another like the currents of a river, forming a pattern that feels more like a map than a message. A chill runs through the archaeologist as the realization settles. This carving does not belong to any period that has ever been recorded. It is either a purposeful imitation of something older, or it predates every known civilization of this land. The wind picks up, lifting loose grains into shimmering ribbons that dance across the stone surface. The floodlights flicker for a moment, casting long shadows that stretch across the site like dark fingers. In the shifting half-light, the circular structure appears almost alive, breathing, waiting. Someone calls out that the generator is dropping voltage, but their voice shakes. The archaeologist ignores the noise, too fixated on the pattern unfolding beneath the sand. The symbols form a spiral converging toward the center of the circle, where a depression carved into the stone creates a shallow bowl. Its purpose is unclear: a fire pit, a ritual basin, or something far more enigmatic. A tablet fragment discovered earlier now seems connected to this structure. It spoke of a gate of stars and a meeting place between heaven and the deep. At the time, the translation was brushed off as poetic metaphor. But standing here, with the air charged and restless, the archaeologist wonders if the ancient writer meant something more literal. Mesopotamian mythology is filled with references to doors the gods used to descend from the heavens or ascend from the underworld. Most scholars interpret them symbolically, but what if these stories preserved cultural memories of a real site, one that people believed connected their world to another? The generator sputters again. The hum grows louder, vibrating through the sand as though coming from deep below. A flashlight falls from a team member's hand and rolls toward the center of the structure, stopping at the inner ring as if magnetically drawn. A graduate student mutters a prayer under their breath, an old habit from childhood summers spent in the countryside. Even the desert seems to hold its breath. Every dune, every grain of sand, every shadow stands still, watching. For a moment, the archaeologist feels an overwhelming certainty that this place was never meant to be found. Not because it was cursed or sacred or dangerous, though it may have been all three, but because the people who built it wanted it hidden. In a land where temples rose like mountains and cities flourished for thousands of years, nothing this precise, this ancient, has ever surfaced. And yet here it is, a structure both familiar and alien, echoing the ancient world while defying everything known about it. The hum fades as abruptly as it began. The warmth underfoot dissipates. The wind settles. Tools stop vibrating. Everything returns to the quiet, indifferent rhythm of the desert. But the silence that follows feels heavy, as though the ground is holding a secret too vast to be contained. The team resumes breathing, exchanging looks that silently acknowledge the same unspoken thought. Something here has awakened, or perhaps something here has remembered. The archaeologist steps back and surveys the site with new eyes. The circle is not simply a relic. It is not a shrine, nor a ceremonial hearth. It is a design with intention, geometric, cosmic, directional. A door, perhaps, in a civilization obsessed with doors. A gateway, if the carvings are to be believed. And suddenly the old myths of Mesopotamia, with their shimmering thresholds and divine portals, feel less like metaphors and more like echoes of a forgotten truth. As the desert night deepens, the unanswered question lingers in the air like an echo across millennia. Why did the earliest storytellers of this land speak so often of gates? What did they see or believe they saw that inspired a mythology centered around thresholds between worlds? And if the structure truly mirrors those ancient stories, then why did it disappear from history for thousands of years? The archaeologist turns away from the circle, but the sense of unease follows. Something buried in the mythic memory of Mesopotamia has resurfaced. Something older than kings, older than written words, older than the first city that rose on this soil. Whatever lies beneath the sand is not just a relic of stone. It is a question waiting to be asked, a boundary waiting to be crossed, a whisper from a past that still holds the power to unsettle the present. And if this circle is truly what it seems, a door that once mattered, then the real mystery is not how it was built. The real mystery is why, long ago, someone made sure it would never be opened again. The land before the first kingdoms was a world without borders, without writing, without the rigid structures of civilization that would later define Mesopotamia. It was a landscape shaped by water and waiting, where the Tigris and Euphrates wandered freely across the plains in twisting braids, carving out new paths every season. These rivers were not yet the lifelines of empires but unpredictable forces that could nourish or destroy, often in the same year. Early humans living along their banks depended on this restless environment, learning its moods long before they learned to measure its floods. The sound of water moving through reeds, the sudden thunder of a distant storm, and the shifting of riverbeds were more than natural phenomena. They were messages from a world that seemed alive and watchful. Small communities dotted the marshlands, little more than clusters of reed huts raised above the mud. Families fished in the shallow waters and hunted wild birds that migrated seasonally across the wetlands. Life was fragile, uncertain. Every morning was met with both gratitude and unease. A night of heavy rain could transform a familiar landscape into a labyrinth of water the next day. Lightning storms rolled over the plains with alarming frequency, their jagged strikes igniting patches of dry brush and sending people scrambling for safety. For these early inhabitants, nature did not merely surround them. It commanded them, surprised them, punished them. And in the face of such overwhelming forces, imagination became a survival tool. The earliest stories were born from these uncertainties. They were not written down, not etched into clay or carved into stone. They lived in the voices of hunters returning home, in the whispered tales told around fires, in warnings passed from parent to child. The sky, with its shifting constellations and unpredictable tempests, became the canvas on which meaning was painted. When lightning split the night sky, it felt like a doorway being torn open. When the biggest storms arrived from the horizon, rolling like mountains of moving darkness, people spoke of beings who controlled them, giants, spirits, gods. The earth, too, had its secrets. Springs that bubbled from the ground without explanation became sacred. Deep caverns and fissures were avoided, believed to lead to unseen realms. These early Mesopotamians did not divide the world into the natural and supernatural. To them, everything was connected. The stars above, the waters below, the winds that swept across the open plains. Every force had a will and every event had a cause. It wasn't superstition, it was a framework for understanding a world that offered no guarantees. When a river changed course and swallowed a village, it felt like a punishment. When it brought fertile soil and abundant fish, it felt like a blessing. And so the idea emerged that unseen entities, powerful, ancient, divine, walked through the same world humans did, shaping their fortunes through doors humans could not see. As seasons passed and generations layered upon one another, these stories grew richer. People began to imagine a structured cosmos, a world divided into realms. The sky became a place of order, its star patterns more predictable than the fickle rivers. The underworld became a realm of shadows and silence, hidden beneath the earth. And between these realms, they imagined passages, gateways that explained sudden changes, miraculous deliverances, or disastrous upheavals. A sharp earthquake that cracked the ground was a sign that something had moved beneath. A meteor streaking across the night sky was a visitor from another domain. Even the rising mist over the marshes took on meaning, interpreted as a veil between worlds. By the time the first larger settlements appeared, simple villages beginning to cluster around reliable water sources, the idea of cosmic thresholds had already taken root. People marked certain places with stones, not as monuments but as boundaries. These were the first sacred spaces, points where the world seemed thinner, where the wind carried strange sounds or where water emerged from the earth in ways that felt magical. Such spots were not chosen randomly. They were observed, tested, watched. If animals avoided them, if fires behaved strangely there, or if the ground produced odd echoes when walked upon, people took notice. These natural anomalies became the seeds of early ritual, long before temples took shape. In these quiet centuries before writing, before kings, before even cities, the foundation of Mesopotamian belief took form. Not through dogma, but through experience. A sudden storm that cracked open the sky became the origin of thunder gods. The movement of stars across the heavens sparked the first ideas of cosmic cycles. The unpredictable behavior of rivers inspired myths of deities who controlled the flow of life and death. And always, there lingered the notion of thresholds, places where the human world brushed up against something other, something immense. People began to track patterns. They realized that certain stars always rose together at specific times of the year. They noticed that particular winds preceded certain types of storms. They observed that the river's flooding, though violent, followed a rhythm. This dawning awareness transformed fear into curiosity. The world was no longer just chaotic and threatening. It was full of symbols, signs, and hidden knowledge waiting to be uncovered. And with this shift came a profound change. Humans began to see themselves as part of the cosmic story, not merely as victims of its forces, but as potential interpreters of its secrets. The first shamans, elders, or storytellers emerged as mediators between humans and the unseen. Their roles were not yet institutional. They were simply the people most attuned to the rhythms of the environment. They stood at the fragile edge between the physical world and the imagined realms beyond it, shaping early myths that would later evolve into the grand cosmologies of Sumer and Akkad. These early stories, the ones carried in memory rather than written on clay, formed the earliest blueprint of the gate myth. They explained that the world had openings, that the divine moved between realms, and that humans, though fragile, stood close enough to sense these movements. Every storm, every flood, every strange light in the sky became part of an unfolding drama in which the boundaries of existence were thin and permeable. By the time the first cities finally rose from the mud along the rivers, these ideas had already matured into powerful cultural foundations. The people who would soon build temples and craft myths on tablets inherited a world rich with mystery, shaped by generations who saw the landscape not as empty land, but as a place filled with unseen doors. And so, long before the first kingdom crowned its king, long before a single brick of a ziggurat touched the sky, Mesopotamia was already a land of thresholds. an ancient stage set for a myth that would one day speak of gates that open not only between worlds, but between the human and the divine. The ancient story known as the Enuma Elish did not begin as literature. It began as a whispered truth carried across generations, long before any scribe pressed a stylus into wet clay. In the earliest centuries of Mesopotamian memory, when people still looked upon storms as battles and the sunrise as a miracle, the universe was not a silent expanse of physics and dust. It was alive, trembling with purpose. Every shift in the sky was an argument between powers beyond human reach. Every rumble beneath the earth was a sign that those powers were restless. And out of this vibrant, living cosmos emerged one of humanity's first great epics. A tale of worlds clashing, of gods rising and falling, and of boundaries carved between realms. To understand the Enuma Elish is to step into a world where the universe was born through conflict, not silence. The story opens before time, before land or sky, before even the most primitive spirits had taken shape. Everything began with two beings: Apsu, the freshwater abyss that lay beneath the earth, and Tiamat, the saltwater chaos that stretched endlessly beyond. They were not gods as later cultures imagined them. They were forces, vital, unpredictable, ancient. Their mingling created the first generation of deities, each embodying an aspect of the world slowly forming. The winds, the stones, the currents, the gleaming sky. But harmony did not last. The young gods were loud, restless, mischievous. Their movements churned the deep waters and disturbed the stillness of Tiamat's primordial calm. Apsu, exhausted by the chaos, sought to silence them forever. But his plan was overheard, and in a turning point that would echo down mythology for millennia, the young god Ea acted first. In a swift, cunning strike, Ea killed Apsu and used his body to construct his own sacred dwelling. This act shattered the ancient balance. Tiamat, overcome by grief and rage, transformed herself into a monstrous embodiment of chaos. She summoned creatures the world had never seen: dragons, venomous serpents, storms with wings, and crowned a new champion to lead her vengeance: Kingu, a being forged to wield her fury. This cosmic war was not written originally as entertainment. It was Mesopotamia's way of explaining the violent unpredictability of their world. Storms that ripped across the plains with terrifying force were not accidents. They were echoes of celestial conflict. Earthquakes that cracked the ground were not geological events. They were reminders of the struggle beneath creation. The epic framed reality itself as the fragile outcome of a war that could, in theory, resume at any moment. At the center of the story rose Marduk, the champion of the younger gods. He was not merely a warrior. He embodied order, intelligence, and the rising potential of humankind's place in the universe. When the younger gods sought a leader who could confront Tiamat's unstoppable rage, Marduk stepped forward on one condition: that he be granted supreme authority if he succeeded. Desperation forced their agreement, and Marduk prepared for a confrontation that would determine not just divine hierarchy but the very architecture of existence. The battle between Marduk and Tiamat was imagined not as two figures clashing, but as two fundamental principles colliding: order against chaos, structure against endlessness. The skies roared with storms, lightning split the darkness, and the sea rose up in towering waves. Marduk's winds filled Tiamat's open mouth, swelling her until she could not move, and then, with a blow described in the tablets as both violent and sacred, he ended her. From her great divided body he crafted the heavens and the earth. Her ribs became the vault of the sky. Her waters flowed into the new oceans. Her eyes became rivers, and from the spilled blood of Kingu, he fashioned humanity, beings destined to bear memory, gratitude, and responsibility. But buried within this epic of creation lies something more subtle, something more relevant to the mystery of ancient gates. After defeating Tiamat, Marduk did not simply create the world. He organized it. He established laws that governed the movement of stars. He placed each constellation in a precise position. He assigned roles to the winds, the planets, and the great lights of the sky. In effect, he created a cosmic map, a structured cosmos in which every boundary had meaning. In this ordered universe, there were doors, pathways between realms, carefully crafted and fiercely controlled. The heavens were opened at specific times. The underworld had its own guarded thresholds. Nothing moved between these planes without reason. For the Mesopotamians who later inherited this story, these cosmic doors were not abstract. They were reflections of real spaces, temples, ritual chambers, sacred thresholds, where humans believed the boundaries between worlds could momentarily thin. When a priest climbed to the top of a ziggurat and performed a ritual meant to receive the gods, he was reenacting the moment when Marduk established those pathways. When festivals realigned cities to the cycles of the stars, they were honoring the cosmic structure first forged in Tiamat's broken body. Even the tablets themselves emphasized the importance of these connections. The Enuma Elish repeatedly refers to the gates of the deep, the windows of heaven, and the pathways of the gods. These are not metaphors. In the worldview of ancient Mesopotamia, they were literal intersections between realms, places where divine forces could move, places where humans might briefly glimpse the intentions of the unseen. This myth became the backbone of Mesopotamian cosmology, shaping not just religious practice but the architecture of entire cities. Temples were built as mountains linking earth to sky. Rituals were timed with celestial events, reenacting the battle that formed the universe. And everywhere, there lingered the memory that the cosmos itself had once been a battlefield, a place where gates opened and worlds collided. By the time the story was fully recorded on cuneiform tablets in Babylon, it had already lived for centuries in the hearts and voices of countless generations. And while later scribes focused on the triumph of Marduk and the legitimacy of Babylon's power, older layers of the myth speak to something deeper. A primordial fear that the doors forged by the gods were fragile, that the chaos once sealed away could return, and that the boundaries defining reality were never entirely secure. In this violent, poetic birth of the world lies the earliest blueprint for the Mesopotamian concept of portals, gateways between realms that mirrored the cosmic thresholds created at the dawn of time. And as the epic concludes with Marduk establishing order, the implication is clear. The gates remain. They are part of the fabric of creation. They exist wherever the divine once touched the world. Long before archaeologists uncovered stone circles in the desert, long before temples rose into the sky or ancient hymns spoke of shimmering doors, Mesopotamia already held the idea that the universe was stitched together by thresholds. And somewhere in their stories born from storms, blood, and cosmic upheaval, this belief took its first immortal form. The growing tension between light and darkness began to shape the world like an unseen sculptor carving deep grooves into the very fabric of existence. As the primordial forces gathered momentum, something ancient and instinctive awoke in every living creature, as if the entire world understood that an irreversible transformation was approaching. Winds moved differently, no longer drifting aimlessly but carrying faint vibrations of anticipation. The great forests paused in their eternal whispering, listening to a distant resonance that trembled just beneath the surface of reality. Even the oceans, once ceaseless in their cyclical breathing, held their waves a moment longer before releasing them, as though sensing the slow tightening of an invisible thread. Amid this vast shift, the sky itself began to adopt a new character. At dawn the light stretched farther than before, spilling across the horizon with a sharper brilliance, while at dusk the shadows lingered with almost deliberate purpose, refusing to dissolve completely into the deepening blue. Creatures that relied on sunlight grew restless, unsettled by the newfound intensity that felt both protective and interrogative. Those that thrived under the cover of darkness stirred earlier than usual, moving with an energy that bordered on ferocity, driven by impulses they did not understand. Every corner of the world became a stage on which light and shadow performed their silent duel, each refusing to yield ground to the other. The ancient beings who still remembered the first shaping of the world felt the shift more profoundly than all others. Those who had witnessed the rise of mountains and the deepening of valleys could sense that the balance they had grown accustomed to was slipping. Whispers traveled across forgotten lands, carried by beings whose voices had not echoed for ages. They warned of a convergence, a moment when the old equilibrium would fracture and something entirely new would emerge in its place. Some believed this change would bring renewal, a chance for the world to redefine its destiny. Others feared it would open a doorway to chaos, unleashing forces beyond comprehension. As these omens accumulated, the world's great guardians found themselves drawn to ancient places where the boundaries between realms were thin. These sanctuaries, carved by time and guarded by silence, pulsed with faint glimmers of old power. In these places, the air felt heavier, as though saturated with memories of creation itself. The guardians waited there, not with impatience but with solemn understanding, knowing that their presence alone would help steady the fragile balance. They observed the sky, the shifting winds, the restless earth, searching for signs that would reveal the true nature of the approaching change. Travelers who wandered near these sacred regions sensed the difference even without understanding the cause. Some reported dreams filled with blinding radiance or endless fields of shadow stretching beyond the limits of sight. Others felt a sudden surge of courage or an inexplicable surge of fear, emotions rising from depths they had never explored before. People from distant lands began to speak of the same phenomenon, as if the entire world shared one vast heartbeat growing stronger each passing day. Mystics, scholars, and wanderers attempted to decipher these signs, yet every interpretation led only to further mystery. The world's rivers, usually so predictable in their rhythms, began to alter their courses in subtle ways, gliding through paths that had remained unchanged for centuries. Mountain winds brought strange fragrances from unseen sources, carrying hints of forgotten landscapes and colors not yet born. The stars above twinkled with peculiar sharpness, their patterns shifting slightly, as if the universe itself was rearranging its script. These changes were not violent, yet they carried a weight that made them impossible to ignore. Each sign pointed toward something immense, an approaching force that demanded recognition. Yet amidst this uncertainty, there existed a quiet beauty. Light did not merely intensify. It bloomed, stretching across plains and forests like an artist desperately trying to preserve the world's memories before they were rewritten. Shadows did not only lengthen. They deepened, creating sanctuaries of stillness where ancient truths seemed to whisper from the depths. Every moment felt heightened, as though the world knew it was standing on the threshold of revelation. Even the smallest creatures, birds gliding through the air, insects crawling across leaves, found themselves moving with a hushed reverence, as if participating in a ceremony they instinctively understood. Those who stood at the crossroads of fate, aware of the shifting tides, felt emotions blending in strange harmony. Fear mingling with awe, uncertainty mingling with hope. They knew that great forces were gathering, drawing nearer with every breath. But none could predict what shape the future would take or whether light or darkness would ultimately tip the scales. All they could do was witness, listen, and prepare, knowing that the world was bracing itself for a moment that would test the essence of creation. And as the days unfolded, the tension continued to rise, weaving itself deeper into the soul of the world, until anticipation became a living presence, one that waited patiently for the inevitable moment when destiny would finally reveal its face. Beneath the surface of the ancient temples, hidden from the eyes of ordinary worshippers and untouched by centuries of wind and sand, there existed chambers that seemed to defy logic itself. These spaces were not merely rooms or cellars. They were deliberately constructed voids, carved into bedrock with precision that suggested a purpose beyond ordinary storage or ritual. Some chambers were circular, echoing the shape of the heavens above, while others were long, narrow corridors that twisted and turned in ways that made a map of the temple utterly meaningless. Every passage, every arch, every carved stone bore a silent testimony to the knowledge of those who had built them, priests and architects who understood secrets far older than the civilizations themselves. The walls of these hidden chambers were adorned with carvings that seemed familiar at first glance, cuneiform inscriptions and depictions of gods. But closer inspection revealed something uncanny. Spirals, arcs, and concentric circles appeared amidst the familiar iconography, patterns so intricate they almost vibrated with a life of their own. Some scholars initially dismissed these designs as mere decoration, the abstract flourish of an artist's hand. Yet, the precision and repetition of these forms hinted at something else. They were not artistic embellishments but a kind of coded language, perhaps a map, perhaps instructions, perhaps a record of phenomena no human could ordinarily perceive. One could almost imagine that these carvings had been meant to communicate not with the living, but with forces that existed in realms unseen. The first archaeologists who descended into these chambers were struck by the air itself. Unlike the arid wind-swept corridors above, the chambers contained a damp stillness that seemed to resist time. Dust hung suspended in the air, illuminated in beams of sunlight that filtered through narrow openings high above. The temperature remained inexplicably constant, even as the desert outside sweltered in the midday heat or froze under the night chill. Small instruments used to measure magnetic fields or electrical currents often reacted unpredictably, spinning wildly or going entirely silent as though the environment itself refused to be understood. Such anomalies were catalogued and occasionally mentioned in reports, but often dismissed as quirks of measurement or faulty equipment. Yet the more the chambers were explored, the more impossible it became to ignore the evidence. These were spaces designed to do more than merely contain. The carvings inside suggested movement not of people but of something else. Some spirals were aligned with patterns found in the stars, and some symbols corresponded to celestial events that occur only over centuries, almost as if the builders had predicted the slow rotation of planets and the shifting of constellations. There were depictions of beings moving through circular openings, stepping from one world into another. The figures were humanoid in shape, yet their proportions and attire seemed otherworldly, and their faces were deliberately obscured or abstracted. Were these mythic representations, ritualized imagination, or records of experiences the builders had actually witnessed? Scholars debated endlessly, never reaching consensus, because the evidence challenged the boundaries of reason itself. One of the most startling discoveries came from a chamber beneath a temple long abandoned, buried beneath meters of sediment. Excavation revealed a shallow pit in the center, lined with stones arranged in a perfect circle. Within the pit, fragments of a black, glass-like substance were found, partially melted, partially crystallized. Chemical analysis suggested intense heat, far greater than could be produced with ordinary fire. Nearby, inscriptions warned of dire consequences for anyone who attempted to enter or disturb the chamber. The path shall be closed. Those who seek beyond shall not return. Such stark warnings suggested more than spiritual caution. They implied a tangible danger, perhaps even a doorway that had once been active, a threshold that could be opened but should not be. Even the layout of the chambers themselves seemed impossible to comprehend in conventional terms. Some corridors looped back upon themselves in ways that confounded spatial reasoning. Others ended abruptly in walls of stone, yet measurements revealed that these walls were hollow, containing cavities large enough to walk through, yet invisible to the eye. Explorers reported hearing faint sounds, whispers or hums that had no identifiable source. In some areas, compasses and measuring instruments spun uncontrollably. The phenomenon was repeatable. Each new visitor reported the same anomalies, ruling out imagination or mass hysteria. Every detail hinted at knowledge beyond the ordinary, a manipulation of space and matter that the builders understood but the modern mind struggled to accept. Yet perhaps the most compelling evidence was not the physical structure itself but the way these chambers were consistently placed beneath the highest points of the temples, the ziggurats. Unlike common storage rooms or crypts, which might be placed anywhere, these hidden spaces were deliberately aligned with cosmic events, solstices, equinoxes, and particular planetary alignments. Some chambers were constructed so that at a precise moment, the first light of the rising sun would fall on a specific symbol carved into the floor, illuminating it perfectly while the rest of the room remained in darkness. Others were oriented toward the moon or specific stars, suggesting that these spaces were more than sanctuaries. They were instruments, observatories, or perhaps gateways designed to interact with forces beyond the human realm. The mystery deepened when artifacts found within the chambers did not match any known cultural style or period. Small figurines, tools, and inscriptions appeared older than the temple itself, yet exhibited a level of craftsmanship and understanding that surpassed any known technology of the time. The implication was unsettling. Either the builders had access to a tradition lost to history, or they were recording knowledge acquired from something not of this world. The chambers, it seemed, were not merely protective spaces but repositories, vaults of ancient, possibly forbidden, knowledge. Some of the carvings and symbols bore a striking resemblance to those found in other parts of Mesopotamia, in regions separated by hundreds of miles, suggesting a shared understanding or communication among temple architects and priesthoods across cities. Even more puzzling, similar symbols appeared in sites as distant as Anatolia and the Indus Valley, hinting at a broader, almost global network of knowledge that has yet to be understood. The repeated pattern of circles, spirals, and arcs suggests that these shapes themselves were considered more than mere decoration. They were keys, representations of movement between planes, or codes pointing to thresholds that humanity no longer perceives. Over time, it became clear that these subterranean chambers were not accidents of construction, nor simple places for hidden ritual. They were deliberately crafted spaces with precise geometry, celestial alignment, and encoded instructions. They were built to last, to survive millennia beneath sand and debris, untouched by ordinary time. And within them lay the lingering echo of something humanity had once feared and revered. A power, a knowledge, a doorway that had been deliberately hidden from those who were not prepared to comprehend it. As archaeologists continued to probe deeper into these chambers, each discovery brought more questions than answers. The precision, the design, the alignment with cosmic phenomena, and the repeated motifs suggested a singular purpose, but one that defied ordinary interpretation. These hidden spaces were more than sacred, they were deliberate interventions in the world, markers of a reality that was once accessible but intentionally obscured. And as the light of the modern day reached these ancient depths, it became evident that the chambers were waiting, not for scholars, but for those who might one day seek the secrets they had been built to protect. The Anunnaki are often spoken of today with fascination, sometimes dismissed as myth, sometimes sensationalized as ancient astronauts. But to the people of Sumer, they were far more than stories or speculation. They were the embodiment of forces beyond mortal comprehension, beings whose influence shaped the world in ways both visible and invisible. Unlike ordinary gods, who might represent a river, a storm, or a harvest, the Anunnaki were custodians of order and chaos, arbiters of life and death, and stewards of hidden knowledge. They were not distant deities residing in inaccessible heavens. They were ever present in the daily lives of humans, their footsteps echoing in temples, their influence recorded in the stars, the rivers, and the earth itself. Their presence was felt before it was written down, in the trembling of the reed huts, in the sudden storm, in the inexplicable fortune or misfortune that could strike a village at any moment. The oldest tablets describe them with awe and meticulous care. Enlil, lord of the air and storms, wielded power over the winds and enforced divine authority, deciding which cities would thrive and which would falter. Enki, cunning and wise, governed the waters beneath the earth and the hidden knowledge of creation. Ninhursag, mother of life, nurtured fertility both in humans and in the fields. Each Anunnaki had their domain, but more importantly, each was associated with thresholds, symbolic and literal, between the seen and unseen. Some texts describe gates of light through which the Anunnaki descended to the earth, connecting the celestial realm to the human plane. Other passages speak of hidden chambers, subterranean paths, and tunnels that allowed them to move invisibly, sometimes to deliver knowledge, other times to enforce judgment. The arrival of the Anunnaki, as recorded in certain early myths, is not portrayed as sudden but deliberate. They emerged at a time when the human settlements along the Tigris and Euphrates began to flourish, when irrigation, agriculture, and communal structures became sophisticated enough to support dense populations. These beings were drawn to such centers of growth, not simply as overseers but as participants in shaping human destiny. The texts suggest they brought tools, techniques, and wisdom that enabled humans to manipulate the rivers, cultivate the land, and organize into complex societies. To the Sumerians, this was divine favor. Later scholars might label it as technological transfer, but in the context of their worldview, it was a manifestation of cosmic order entering the world directly through a divine threshold. Intriguingly, the Anunnaki were closely tied to the concept of the shining gates or portals, doors through which divine power could move. The inscriptions speak of these thresholds with a reverence that borders on fear. Certain ceremonial spaces within temples were believed to align with these gates, enabling the priesthood to communicate directly with the Anunnaki. Rituals performed at specific times of the day, during particular lunar phases, or in accordance with the positions of stars were thought to activate these connections. Some of these descriptions even imply that mortals might, under extraordinary circumstances, follow the same path, crossing the boundary between realms for brief but transformative experiences. These were never casual journeys. They were rites demanding discipline, purity, and an understanding of cosmic law. The narrative of the Anunnaki is also intertwined with humanity's origin. In several myths, they are depicted as the creators or modifiers of human beings, shaping clay into flesh and breathing life into mortal form. Humans were not slaves, at least not in the earliest myths, but caretakers of the earth, entrusted with maintaining a balance the gods themselves had established. Yet with this gift came the burden of obedience. Those who disrespected divine order risked calamity, as the Anunnaki did not hesitate to impose punishment. Floods, plagues, and sudden wars were often attributed to their wrath or disappointment, reinforcing the idea that these beings were deeply entwined with both the natural and moral order of existence. Among the Anunnaki, Enki stands out as the most enigmatic. Known as the Lord of Hidden Waters, the Abzu, he was both creator and protector of secret knowledge. The Abzu was not just a mythic pool. It symbolized the deep, often invisible forces of the earth and the cosmos. It was the source of wisdom, the repository of information too dangerous or profound for ordinary humans. Within the Abzu lay instructions for agriculture, healing, astrology, and perhaps even phenomena beyond mortal comprehension. Yet alongside his generosity, Enki was a trickster, a master of cunning who would often intervene to subvert the intentions of other deities when he deemed it necessary to protect humanity. In doing so, he became the custodian of thresholds, the one most closely associated with the movement between worlds. References to Enki and the gates are scattered throughout ancient hymns and temple inscriptions. One particularly striking passage reads of a circle of light upon the water, a threshold where he alone could move between the cosmic and terrestrial realms. Mortals were permitted to approach only under strict guidance, and only after preparation that could last weeks or months. Some scholars have interpreted these descriptions as metaphorical, representing enlightenment or spiritual awakening. Others have suggested they might reflect experiences induced by altered states of consciousness during ritual. Yet certain fragments hint at something more tangible, that the gates, whether symbolic or real, were carefully constructed mechanisms or phenomena designed to mediate interaction between planes of existence. The influence of the Anunnaki did not remain confined to temples or myths. It shaped the very architecture and ritual of Mesopotamian civilization. Cities were laid out in accordance with cosmic principles, streets and ziggurats aligned with the movements of stars that the gods themselves had set into motion. The timing of harvests, festivals, and even political decisions often corresponded with celestial patterns, reinforcing the impression that human life operated under the surveillance and guidance of these powerful beings. In essence, the Anunnaki acted as the invisible architects of a world in which human and divine destinies were inextricably linked. Perhaps most fascinating is the recurring motif of forbidden knowledge. Certain tablets explicitly warn that mortals must not attempt to open doors or enter chambers reserved for the Anunnaki. These prohibitions are not casual admonishments but urgent, repeated warnings. The texts imply that crossing certain thresholds without guidance could unleash chaos, bringing devastation not only to the individual but to entire communities. This consistent emphasis on secrecy suggests that the Anunnaki were guardians not only of earthly order but of realms or knowledge humans were not yet equipped to understand. In this context, the gates, the portals, and the hidden chambers become more than myth. They are markers of ancient control over forces that may have been very real to those who first witnessed them. By examining the myths and correlating them with archaeological evidence, a pattern emerges. The Anunnaki were associated with specific places, precise alignments, and carefully preserved knowledge. Their movements, their interventions, and their instructions to humanity were not random but deliberate, oriented around thresholds both celestial and terrestrial. They existed in a world where humans and gods could interact only at defined points, at moments when alignment, ritual, and readiness converged. And within this framework, it becomes clear why some ancient sites were designed to hide, protect, or amplify certain phenomena. The Anunnaki's presence was encoded in stone, in water, in ritual, and in myth, leaving a legacy of gateways whose purpose was partly revealed and partly forbidden. In the end, the Anunnaki are not merely figures of legend. They are a lens through which we can understand why Mesopotamian civilization so deeply revered thresholds, portals, and hidden spaces. They are the reason temples were built with concealed chambers, why priests guarded secret rituals, and why myths consistently warned of gates not to be crossed. Whether literal or symbolic, the Anunnaki's association with these thresholds underscores a profound truth in Mesopotamian thought. Some knowledge, some power, and some pathways were never meant for ordinary eyes. Only those who understood, who were prepared, who had been chosen or perhaps tested, could approach what lay beyond. Enki, the lord of the Abzu, was a figure whose presence rippled through every layer of Mesopotamian thought, bridging the human and divine in ways that no other deity could. Unlike the more overtly commanding Enlil, whose dominion over storms and kingship was absolute and fearsome, Enki was subtle, elusive, and infinitely wise. He governed the deep waters beneath the earth, a mysterious realm known as the Abzu, which was not merely a physical space but a repository of knowledge, power, and potential. These waters were said to flow in hidden currents beneath cities, rivers, and even the foundations of temples, carrying with them secrets from the earliest days of creation. To the Sumerians, the Abzu represented both literal and symbolic depths, a place of hidden wisdom, of unseen influence, and of thresholds where ordinary mortals could brush against the divine. The temples dedicated to Enki were built with extraordinary care, often incorporating subterranean chambers, water features, and precisely aligned corridors. These sanctuaries were unlike those devoted to other gods. They were designed to replicate, as much as possible, the hidden waters of the Abzu. Ritual pools reflected the light of the heavens, channels and aqueducts carried water in careful, purposeful patterns, and chambers beneath the main temple were carved deep into bedrock to evoke the hidden currents that flowed unseen. The architecture itself was part of the ritual. By navigating these spaces, priests and initiates symbolically traveled through the Abzu, following the paths of the Lord they served, tracing the currents of knowledge he had set into motion at the dawn of time. Enki was revered not only for his wisdom but for his cunning and compassion. In myths, he often acted as the intermediary between humans and other gods, guiding mortals through crises or interceding when divine wrath threatened civilization. He was a trickster in the best sense. Clever, unpredictable, and willing to bend rules to preserve life or protect knowledge. One of the most famous examples is his role in the myth of Atrahasis, where he warned humanity of an impending flood. He provided instructions to build a vessel to survive the deluge, ensuring the continuity of human civilization. Unlike other deities, Enki's interventions were often disguised as guidance or subtle influence, requiring humans to act upon knowledge that was revealed in fragments, through signs, dreams, or carefully hidden instructions. The Abzu itself, as a locus of Enki's power, was understood to be a threshold, a boundary where the human world intersected with cosmic forces. Water, in Mesopotamian thought, was never merely physical. It was alive, sentient, and capable of transmitting divine will. The flowing currents beneath the earth carried not only nourishment for crops and sustenance for life, but also knowledge encoded in patterns that humans could barely perceive. Initiates of Enki's cult were trained to interpret these patterns, to read the currents as one might read a scroll, and to navigate the hidden spaces where divine guidance could manifest. The chambers within the Abzu were not open to all. They were restricted, carefully guarded, and ritualized, accessible only to those deemed capable of comprehending and respecting the hidden order. One of the most enigmatic aspects of Enki's mythology is the recurring theme of secret knowledge being encoded in physical structures. Archaeologists have noted that temples attributed to Enki, such as the Abzu in Eridu, were constructed with precise geometric arrangements, aligning with celestial bodies and incorporating hidden chambers that correspond to underground water channels. These chambers often contained inscriptions, bas-reliefs, and symbolic objects that seem to represent both the known world and unseen realms. Some of the carvings depict spirals, arcs, and concentric circles, shapes remarkably similar to those found in other Mesopotamian sites associated with gates or thresholds. The suggestion is clear. Enki was intimately connected with portals of knowledge, pathways that allowed mortals to interact with forces beyond ordinary perception. Enki's association with creation further underscores his role as a guardian of thresholds. In many myths, he is credited with shaping humanity from clay, breathing life into mortal beings, and granting them intelligence, skills, and awareness. These acts were not merely acts of divine benevolence. They represented the careful transfer of knowledge across realms. Humans were positioned as intermediaries between the visible world and the hidden, carrying forward the wisdom that Enki protected. The Abzu, therefore, was both a literal and symbolic reservoir. It contained the forces that gave life, the wisdom that preserved civilization, and the boundaries that dictated who could access this knowledge. The concept of water as a medium of divine passage reinforces the idea of thresholds in Enki's cult. Water flows, and with it, so too moves information, power, and influence. Initiates learn to interpret reflections, currents, and patterns in ritual pools, often undergoing lengthy preparation to perceive messages embedded within the hidden depths. These practices may seem enigmatic today, but in their context, they were understood as vital exercises in attuning to the divine order. By navigating water both physically and spiritually, humans could align themselves with cosmic currents, momentarily crossing the boundary between the mortal realm and the deeper forces Enki governed. Intriguingly, texts suggest that Enki did not confine his guidance to mortals alone. He was also involved in regulating the behavior of other gods, sometimes subtly manipulating events to maintain balance. In this sense, he acted as a custodian of thresholds in multiple dimensions, between life and death, chaos and order, visibility and concealment. The gates of the Abzu, the hidden chambers, and the cryptic inscriptions all point to a system of boundaries, structured, deliberate, and intensely guarded, through which both divine and mortal agents could interact with reality in ways that ordinary experience could not capture. The enduring fascination with Enki lies in the duality of his character. He is a god of hidden depths and subtle cunning, a benefactor of humanity and a custodian of formidable secrets. The Abzu is both a sanctuary and a boundary, a place where knowledge is stored and thresholds are maintained. Temples, rituals, and myths collectively create a framework for understanding how humans might approach the unknown without being overwhelmed. In this sense, Enki's legacy is inseparable from the idea of portals, gates, and hidden paths, themes that echo not only in Mesopotamian cosmology but also in the material culture of the civilization, from ziggurats to subterranean chambers to the carvings that still puzzle archaeologists today. Ultimately, Enki represents a bridge between worlds, a mediator, a teacher, and a guardian. His influence permeates the structures, myths, and knowledge of ancient Mesopotamia, suggesting that the ancients recognized thresholds far beyond ordinary perception. Whether through water, ritual, or hidden symbols, Enki's presence was felt as an enduring invitation and a warning that the hidden currents of the world contain power and understanding, but only those who approach with care, reverence, and insight can navigate them safely. In this way, the Lord of the Hidden Waters becomes more than a mythic figure. He becomes a symbol of the possibility of human interaction with forces that were deliberately concealed, gateways to realms both literal and metaphorical, waiting to be rediscovered. Long before the great cities of Babylon and Ur rose to prominence, the landscape of Mesopotamia was dotted with smaller, almost forgotten settlements. Places that seem unremarkable at first glance, yet beneath their foundations lay a hidden world of astonishing complexity. Among these early sites were temples that have long since vanished beneath layers of sand, water, and time, yet their remnants hint at a purpose far beyond mere worship. Unlike the massive ziggurats familiar to modern imagination, these early sanctuaries were carefully integrated into the natural environment, often built near springs, marshes, or hidden river channels, suggesting a deliberate attempt to connect with forces that flowed both above and beneath the surface. Their locations were not arbitrary. They aligned with celestial events, seasonal cycles, and what the ancients perceived as invisible lines of energy that traced across the land. These were the first places designed to host portals, thresholds between the human world and the hidden realms the Mesopotamians believed surrounded them. Archaeologists exploring these sites have often encountered strange features: subterranean corridors, circular pits, and chambers whose entrances were concealed or partially blocked. Some of these spaces were too large to be mere storage rooms, yet too irregular to serve as conventional sanctuaries. Others contained basins carved with intricate symbols, spirals, and concentric circles, echoing patterns found in celestial observation. Every detail, stone placement, channel design, orientation of doors, was deliberate, suggesting knowledge of forces that went far beyond ordinary human comprehension. Scholars have speculated that these features were connected to ritual practices designed to interact with the divine, to activate thresholds that allowed movement or communication across realms. The more one studies these sites, the clearer it becomes that the ancients were not merely building temples. They were constructing instruments, delicate mechanisms capable of bridging dimensions. One of the most remarkable aspects of these early temples is their consistent alignment with astronomical phenomena. Some were oriented toward the rising sun on solstices, while others corresponded with lunar cycles or the positions of specific stars. At certain times of the year, light would penetrate deep into the interior, illuminating carvings or objects placed precisely in the path of the sun. Such effects were not accidental. They required extraordinary planning, advanced observation, and a sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. These alignments suggest that the temples were not passive structures but active participants in cosmic events, designed to focus or channel energies that modern science cannot yet fully measure. In the context of the myths, these alignments may represent the opening of portals, moments when the boundaries between worlds were thin, when divine forces could interact directly with the human realm. The first portals, then, were not simply metaphorical. They were locations, carefully engineered and ritually activated. Texts from later periods describe gates made of light or water, thresholds hidden behind carvings or beneath pools, and pathways that could only be traversed by those with precise knowledge of timing, alignment, and preparation. Many of these descriptions correspond closely to features found in excavated temples, lending weight to the theory that the Mesopotamians were experimenting with methods to create, access, or stabilize gateways between realms. Certain chambers contain symbols associated with movement, flow, or transformation, which may indicate an understanding of forces that were spatial as well as spiritual. These early portals, although hidden, were clearly central to the religious and social life of the communities that built them. The artifacts found within these lost temples further reinforce their extraordinary purpose. Clay tablets, small figurines, and ritual objects often appear deliberately placed, suggesting specific functions tied to ceremonial practice. Some artifacts bear inscriptions that hint at thresholds, gates, or connections with celestial beings. In several cases, the placement of objects corresponds to the angles of light or water flow within the chamber, suggesting an integration of material culture, architecture, and natural forces in ways that are only beginning to be understood. These discoveries indicate that the ancients were not content merely to venerate gods. They sought to interact with them directly, creating points of contact where humans could witness, participate in, or even control aspects of the divine order. Perhaps the most mysterious element is the repetition of architectural motifs across widely separated sites. Circular pits, spirals, basins, and hidden corridors appear not only in southern Mesopotamia, but also in sites hundreds of miles to the north and east. This suggests a shared understanding, a network of knowledge transmitted between priesthoods or secret societies over great distances. The consistency implies that these portals were not isolated experiments but part of a broader system of spiritual and possibly technological practice, designed to maintain a connection with forces that the ancients considered essential for life, order, and civilization itself. Excavations also reveal traces of ritualized water use, which may have been central to activating these portals. Pools, channels, and basins were often shaped to create specific reflections or flows, amplifying light, shadow, or sound in ways that enhanced the experience of those entering the chamber. Initiates may have observed these effects as signals, guides, or confirmations of their readiness to cross thresholds. The careful orchestration of environmental factors, light, water, sound, geometry, demonstrates a level of sophistication that goes far beyond simple worship, suggesting a practical understanding of phenomena that we might today categorize as physics, acoustics, or optics, applied for spiritual or dimensional purposes. Over time, these lost temples became repositories of knowledge, holding both practical and esoteric wisdom. They encoded the understanding of celestial cycles, hydrology, ritual, and the movement of invisible forces in ways that were preserved, hidden, and protected. Inscriptions warned of the dangers of misuse, implying that the portals were not neutral. They carried consequences. Those who attempted to open gates unprepared risked catastrophe, as texts and carvings repeatedly suggest. The temples were, in essence, laboratories of the sacred, where the boundary between human and divine, visible and invisible, ordinary and extraordinary, could be observed, tested, and traversed. In examining the remains of these early sanctuaries, a pattern emerges. Mesopotamian civilization was deeply preoccupied with thresholds, places where worlds intersect, where the unseen can touch the seen, and where the human mind might catch a glimpse of what lies beyond. These lost temples, often buried beneath later cities or eroded by time, were not mere religious structures. They were deliberately designed portals, sites where cosmic alignment, architecture, ritual, and human intention converged. They stand as a testament to a civilization that sought not merely to worship its gods, but to engage them directly, to bridge the gap between the mortal and the eternal, and to navigate the hidden currents of the universe that still whisper across the sands of Mesopotamia today. The gates and hidden chambers of ancient Mesopotamia did not operate in isolation. For every portal, threshold, or sacred corridor, there existed a class of human custodians whose lives were dedicated to their protection, maintenance, and ritual activation. These were the priests and guardians, individuals chosen not simply for social status or family lineage, but for an unusual combination of intelligence, discipline, and sensitivity to the unseen. From the earliest records, we see evidence that certain priesthoods were trained from childhood to understand the subtle languages of the cosmos, symbols, rhythms, and patterns that ordinary eyes and minds could not perceive. They memorized complex hymns, studied the movements of the stars, and learned to read inscriptions that described not only spiritual principles, but the physical mechanisms embedded within the temples themselves. Every initiation, every test, and every ritual was part of a lifelong education designed to prepare them for the responsibility of guarding forces that were simultaneously sacred, powerful, and dangerous. These guardians were more than ritual performers. They were intermediaries between worlds. In their daily practice, they observed celestial patterns, monitored the flow of water through hidden channels, and maintained intricate mechanisms within subterranean chambers. Some chambers were sealed behind doors that required precise timing and specific sequences of actions to unlock, a design intended to prevent careless access. Others were aligned so that the play of sunlight or moonlight at certain times would illuminate sacred symbols, guiding the priest through the correct path. Every element, the geometry of the chamber, the placement of carvings, the movement of water and air, was carefully designed to respond to the actions of a knowledgeable operator. In effect, the temples themselves were instruments, and the priests were the musicians and conductors, orchestrating interaction between human and divine, material and immaterial, seen and unseen. Training to become a guardian was arduous and often perilous. Initiates spent long periods in isolation, meditating, fasting, and rehearsing rituals in subterranean spaces that tested both endurance and perception. They were required to observe natural phenomena, storms, tides, the movements of birds and animals, as signs, teaching them to interpret patterns that might indicate a shift in the forces they were charged to monitor. Certain myths suggest that mistakes or lapses in concentration could have immediate consequences, not only for the individual but for entire cities. This was not symbolic caution. In the worldview of the Mesopotamians, the portals connected to the underlying currents of the universe itself. Misalignment, neglect, or misuse could disrupt the flow of cosmic order, potentially unleashing chaos. Priests were also the keepers of secret knowledge, often hidden in plain sight. Many inscriptions, tablets, and carvings found in Mesopotamian temples are enigmatic, containing instructions or warnings that appear coded or incomplete. Some may describe practical rituals, while others allude to phenomena that could be interpreted as openings to other realms. It is likely that only those initiated into the highest levels of the priesthood understood the full implications of these texts. The secrecy was necessary because the power and danger inherent in the gates could not be underestimated. The temples were simultaneously libraries, laboratories, and fortresses, places where knowledge and security were inseparable. Socially, the guardians occupied a unique position. While they were respected and often held significant influence over kings and rulers, they also lived under strict ethical and behavioral codes. The myths and administrative records alike emphasize humility, discretion, and moral integrity as prerequisites for those who could approach the gates. Their influence extended beyond ritual. They advised on agricultural cycles, city planning, and even military strategy, all decisions subtly guided by celestial observation and an understanding of thresholds. This dual role as both spiritual and practical advisors positioned them as indispensable to the civilization's survival. The guardians also engaged in complex ceremonies designed to activate or stabilize the portals. Some involved precise recitations of hymns timed to astronomical events, where words, tones, and rhythms were believed to resonate with the hidden currents of the Abzu and other threshold points. Others required physical movement, walking labyrinthine corridors, touching specific stones, or directing the flow of water through channels, each action calibrated to interact with the forces embedded in the chamber. The combination of verbal, physical, and environmental elements suggests that the Mesopotamians understood these portals not merely as spiritual or symbolic gateways, but as phenomena that responded to precise sequences of stimuli, almost like mechanisms or machines powered by ritual, observation, and intention. Legends preserved by the priesthood describe extraordinary abilities conferred upon those who successfully mastered the gates. Initiates were said to perceive events beyond normal human perception, to receive visions or messages from divine beings, and in rare cases, to physically traverse thresholds that others could only imagine. Some texts even imply that certain guardians could move between distant locations almost instantaneously, as if the portals allowed manipulation of space itself. While modern readers might interpret these claims as allegorical, the consistency and detail with which they appear across multiple sites suggest a deeply held belief in the tangible reality of the gates. The priesthood's vigilance extended to guarding against misuse by outsiders. Many temples were intentionally labyrinthine, with false passages, hidden doors, and concealed chambers designed to confuse the uninitiated. Inscriptions frequently warn of severe consequences for intruders: injury, madness, or death. Archaeological evidence of collapsed or blocked passages may reflect deliberate acts of protection, closing off access to those unprepared for what lay beyond. These precautions indicate that the Mesopotamians recognized the inherent danger of interacting with thresholds without proper knowledge or respect. Over centuries, as civilizations rose and fell, the role of these guardians remained crucial. Even when political structures changed, priesthoods persisted, maintaining continuity of knowledge and practice. Some texts suggest that during times of upheaval, the most secret chambers were intentionally sealed, their keys hidden, and rituals suspended until stability returned. This reflects a profound understanding of the gate's power. They were not static relics but living interfaces with the universe, requiring careful stewardship and responsible action. Ultimately, the priests and guardians of Mesopotamia were the custodians of possibility. They navigated a world where the ordinary and the extraordinary intersected, ensuring that portals and thresholds were engaged safely, knowledge was preserved, and humanity could interact with forces beyond its ordinary comprehension. They embodied the principle that power without preparation is perilous, that knowledge must be guided by wisdom, and that some mysteries, no matter how alluring, demand both respect and discipline. In their careful watch over the gates, they ensured that the ancient connection between human and divine endured, even as the sands of time threatened to bury it forever. The rituals that surrounded the gates and thresholds of Mesopotamia were elaborate, meticulous, and deeply symbolic, reflecting a worldview in which every action, sound, and gesture had significance. These ceremonies were not performed casually. They required years of training, precise knowledge of celestial alignments, and an unwavering attention to detail. From the moment an initiate entered a temple dedicated to Enki or another guardian deity, they were immersed in a world in which every movement could influence forces beyond ordinary perception. Light and shadow were orchestrated with care, flowing through hidden corridors at specific angles, illuminating carvings or pools in ways that were both functional and symbolic. Water, often sourced from sacred springs or channeled through ritual conduits, served as a medium for divine interaction, reflecting celestial patterns or carrying the vibrations of incantations to subterranean chambers. Ceremonial timing was paramount. Many rituals were scheduled to coincide with solstices, equinoxes, or lunar phases, moments when the heavens aligned in ways that amplified the intended effect. Priests would track the movements of stars, planets, and the moon with painstaking precision, recording subtle shifts that could determine the success of a rite. Even slight deviations could disrupt the activation of a threshold, rendering the chamber inert or, according to some texts, dangerously unstable. The Mesopotamians believed that the universe was a delicate, interconnected system. To interact with it successfully, one had to move in harmony with its rhythms. Rituals were, in essence, a choreography of cosmic alignment, designed to open portals at moments when the hidden currents of power were accessible and stable. The verbal component of these rituals was equally critical. Hymns, chants, and spoken instructions were often composed in highly structured forms, incorporating repetitions, cadences, and tonal shifts intended to resonate with the chambers themselves. Some inscriptions suggest that certain words functioned as keys, activating channels of energy within walls, floors, or pools. Priests were trained to modulate their voices, timing their utterances to coincide with the arrival of sunlight, the movement of water, or the subtle vibrations sensed within the stone. In this way, the temple became an instrument, and the human voice a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of interaction between material and immaterial forces. Physical movement was another essential element. Initiates and priests walked intricate patterns through labyrinthine corridors, touched carved stones in precise sequences, and guided the flow of water along specific paths. These actions were not arbitrary but encoded into the very design of the chambers. Stone, water, air, and human motion were all coordinated to create effects that were both observable and hidden, reflections, echoes, subtle shifts in temperature or humidity, and even vibrations that could be felt in the body. Each step, each gesture, each placement of hands or tools was carefully prescribed, creating a ritualized navigation of the threshold itself. Failure to follow the exact sequence could result in the ritual being ineffective, or worse, could awaken forces not meant to be engaged. Sacrificial offerings played a complex role, but not merely in the sense of appeasing deities. Early texts and archaeological evidence suggest that offerings, often grain, water, incense, or crafted objects, were integrated into the mechanics of the portals. Placing an object in a basin at a precise time could serve as a conduit, amplifying energy or signaling readiness. Some inscriptions describe gifts to the currents, implying that the ritual elements interacted with hidden forces in tangible ways. In other words, offerings were not symbolic alone. They were functional components of a system designed to facilitate safe interaction with realms beyond the ordinary. An essential component of the rituals was the purification of the participants. Initiates often underwent lengthy preparations: fasting, bathing in sacred waters, meditative practices, and isolation before approaching a threshold. The texts emphasize that impurities of body or mind could distort the effect of a ritual or attract unintended consequences. This insistence on preparation indicates a sophisticated understanding that interacting with thresholds was not merely a spiritual or symbolic act, but one that required alignment of the practitioner with the forces at work. Mind, body, and environment were all integral elements in the activation of the portal. Some rituals included the use of light in remarkable ways. Chambers were designed so that sun or moonlight would penetrate at specific angles, illuminating carvings, basins, or symbolic objects. Mirrors or polished metals may have been employed to reflect or intensify these beams, creating patterns that activated inscriptions or guided participants through hidden passages. The interplay of natural light and architecture was not incidental. It was a deliberate design that ensured the proper conditions for thresholds to open. When performed correctly, these rituals produced effects that could be experienced visually, audibly, and even physically, creating a profound impression that reinforced the sacred nature of the portal. The texts also describe moments when multiple priests acted in synchrony, their actions coordinated across distance, sometimes separated by multiple chambers or floors. This coordination suggests a sophisticated awareness of resonance, timing, and interaction between different points within the temple complex. The activation of a portal was a communal endeavor, requiring the skill and discipline of many individuals working in precise harmony. It was a dance of intention, knowledge, and physical presence, orchestrated to bridge worlds that ordinary humans could not normally access. Mystical experiences are frequently described as outcomes of these rituals. Initiates reported visions of light, encounters with divine beings, or sudden understanding of knowledge otherwise inaccessible. In some cases, accounts describe sensations of movement, as if traveling through space along currents invisible to others. While modern interpretations often consider these phenomena symbolic or psychological, the consistency and repetition across multiple texts and sites suggest that the Mesopotamians perceived them as real, tangible results of proper ritual practice. These experiences reinforced the belief that the thresholds were alive, responsive, and capable of mediating between the human and divine. Finally, the activation of thresholds was never permanent. Texts and architectural evidence indicate that portals required continuous engagement, periodic rituals, and careful maintenance. The gates were not static structures. They were dynamic, interactive, and demanding. The priests and guardians understood that neglect could lead to the deterioration of both physical and spiritual integrity, making the threshold dangerous or inaccessible. This underscores a central principle of Mesopotamian ritual practice. Knowledge and power are inseparable from discipline, vigilance, and respect. The thresholds were alive, and only those prepared and trained could safely interact with them. In essence, these rituals were not merely religious ceremonies. They were precise, multi-layered systems for managing forces that the Mesopotamians recognized as real, powerful, and potentially transformative. Every chant, gesture, alignment, and offering was part of an intricate choreography designed to bridge the human and divine. The combination of architecture, water, light, sound, and human action created a space in which thresholds could open, knowledge could flow, and the boundaries between realms could be temporarily traversed. Through these rituals, the priests and guardians ensured that the gates remained both accessible and protected, offering a controlled passage into mysteries that remain, even today, beyond ordinary comprehension. The walls of Mesopotamian temples and hidden chambers are more than mere stone. They are living records of thought, ritual, and cosmic understanding, encoded in ways that continue to perplex scholars and archaeologists today. Carvings, bas-reliefs, and inscriptions cover surfaces that are otherwise hidden from ordinary view, suggesting that they were intended not for the casual worshipper but for those trained to decipher their meaning. The motifs range from recognizable depictions of gods and humans to abstract symbols, spirals, concentric circles, arcs, and geometric patterns that appear to convey ideas far beyond the superficial. Some scholars propose that these designs were mnemonic devices, encoding instructions for ritual and alignment. Others suggest they are maps, perhaps of celestial phenomena, subterranean waterways, or thresholds between realms. Whatever their purpose, it is clear that the stones themselves were a medium, a bridge between human understanding and the forces the ancients sought to engage. The inscriptions often combine pictorial and written elements in ways that defy conventional reading. Figures of deities are interwoven with symbols resembling constellations or abstract patterns, while cuneiform text sometimes appears in unusual sequences, carved along spirals or across multiple planes of a wall. This complex arrangement may have served multiple functions: recording ritual knowledge, providing instructions for navigating chambers, or encoding the principles of cosmic order. For the initiates who understood the system, these walls were not passive decoration but active guides, capable of conveying information in a dynamic, almost performative way. Some passages hint that certain sequences of observation, touch, or light exposure could unlock aspects of the knowledge embedded within the stone, implying an interactive quality to the architecture itself. Among the most enigmatic carvings are the spirals and concentric circles that appear repeatedly across different sites. Scholars have long debated their meaning, with interpretations ranging from purely symbolic representations of cycles of time to instructions for interacting with thresholds or hidden currents of energy. In some instances, the shapes are aligned precisely with the cardinal points, celestial movements, or water channels within the temple, suggesting a functional purpose in addition to their symbolic role. The repetition of these patterns across sites separated by hundreds of miles implies a shared, perhaps secret, understanding, a tradition of encoded knowledge transmitted among priesthoods, carefully preserved over centuries. Other carvings depict humanoid figures moving through circular or oval shapes, sometimes accompanied by rays of light or stylized currents. These images may represent initiates passing through thresholds, or possibly deities themselves interacting with the hidden layers of the world. The consistency of these motifs across multiple sites suggests that the ancients envisioned thresholds not as metaphorical constructs, but as real phenomena, accessible under specific conditions. Some figures carry tools or objects that appear to interact with the environment, hinting that material action, combined with ritual or observation, was necessary to engage these hidden forces. Stone inscriptions also contain repeated warnings and instructions, emphasizing both the potential power and danger inherent in these thresholds. Phrases caution against entering chambers unprepared, touching certain objects, or attempting rituals without guidance. These admonitions are not merely symbolic. The texts convey a practical understanding that interacting with portals and gates was inherently risky. In some cases, the inscriptions suggest that incorrect actions could disrupt the flow of energy, cause collapse, or even bring harm to those involved. The combination of symbolic, instructional, and cautionary elements reflects a worldview in which knowledge, power, and responsibility were inseparably linked. Bas-reliefs often accompany the inscriptions, illustrating rituals, celestial events, or mythic narratives. These depictions serve multiple purposes. They record cultural memory, provide guidance for ritual practice, and encode cosmological principles. Some reliefs show the arrangement of objects, the alignment of bodies, or the flow of water and light, hinting at the procedures required to activate thresholds or access hidden knowledge. Others depict mythic narratives in which gods or semi-divine beings pass through gates, interact with humans, or manipulate forces beyond mortal comprehension. By embedding such narratives alongside practical instruction, the walls function as both storytellers and teachers, preserving complex knowledge in a form that could endure across generations. The stones themselves were sometimes treated with substances believed to enhance their function. Traces of pigments, resins, or oils have been found in many hidden chambers, suggesting that color, scent, or other sensory elements played a role in the activation or perception of the inscriptions. Certain patterns appear to respond differently under varied light conditions, particularly when sunlight or moonlight penetrates the chamber at precise angles. This implies that the ancients understood the interplay between material, ritual, and natural phenomena in a sophisticated, integrated way. The walls were, in effect, active participants in ritual, responding to observation, motion, and timing. It is also notable that these inscriptions often emphasize secrecy and hierarchy. Not all symbols were meant for all eyes. Some sequences appear deliberately obscure, accessible only to those trained in the interpretive system. This controlled access ensured that knowledge was preserved while minimizing the risk of misuse. It is likely that the priesthood transmitted interpretation orally and through apprenticeship, ensuring continuity and precision over centuries. In this context, the walls themselves acted as both repository and teacher, conveying a layered message that could be accessed gradually as the initiate gained skill, understanding, and readiness. The cumulative effect of these carvings and inscriptions is staggering. A single chamber can contain multiple layers of meaning: astronomical, architectural, ritual, mythological, and symbolic. Viewed superficially, it might appear as mere decoration or religious illustration. Yet when examined in detail, a carefully orchestrated system emerges, one designed to encode knowledge, guide action, and facilitate interaction with forces considered fundamental to existence itself. These inscriptions are not static. They are living records of a civilization's understanding of thresholds, portals, and the hidden currents of the universe. Ultimately, the mysteries recorded in stone speak to a worldview in which the material and the immaterial, the human and the divine, are in constant interaction. The walls of Mesopotamian temples, through their carvings, bas-reliefs, and inscriptions, preserve not only stories but instructions, warnings, and pathways to knowledge once considered attainable only by those who were prepared. They are enduring testaments to a civilization that sought to bridge the ordinary and the extraordinary, embedding guidance for navigating thresholds into the very fabric of their sacred spaces. Even today, millennia later, these stones invite modern observers to ponder the same questions. What was the nature of these portals? Who could traverse them? And what hidden forces once flowed through the hearts of these temples, recorded forever in stone? Long before the first ziggurats cast their shadows over the marshlands of Mesopotamia, humans looked skyward, finding meaning, guidance, and patterns in the movements of stars, planets, and the moon. Celestial observation was not a pastime. It was an essential component of survival, governance, and spiritual practice. The Mesopotamians believed that the heavens were a reflection of the divine order on earth, that each star, constellation, and planetary movement carried messages from the gods. Among these heavenly forces, certain alignments were understood to resonate with the hidden thresholds scattered across the land, portals that connected the mortal realm with deeper, unseen layers of existence. The priesthood devoted generations to mapping these celestial rhythms, understanding that timing was crucial. A portal could only be activated when cosmic conditions aligned perfectly, when stars and planets moved in a pattern recognized by the ancients as favorable for passage. The connections between the heavens and the earth were intricate and precise. Temples, ziggurats, and hidden chambers were often constructed along sight lines that corresponded to significant celestial events. Solstices and equinoxes were not merely markers of time. They were moments when light, shadow, and energy could converge to activate thresholds, illuminating carvings, pools, or hidden inscriptions in ways that ordinary observation could not achieve. Some sites were aligned with lunar cycles, allowing the moon's reflection to reach deep into subterranean spaces, touching symbols and inscriptions that remained hidden under ordinary light. In these moments, the celestial and terrestrial planes intersected, creating opportunities for interaction with forces beyond the human senses. Stars themselves were understood as guides and markers. Certain constellations were associated with specific deities, and their positions in the sky dictated ritual timing, offering instructions for when and how portals could be approached safely. The appearance of a particular star at dawn might indicate that a ritual was to commence, while the rising of a constellation at dusk could signal that a portal's energies were at their peak. The priesthood meticulously recorded these patterns, often for generations, developing a sophisticated system of celestial observation that functioned both as practical guidance for agricultural cycles and as a spiritual map for interacting with thresholds. Planetary movements, too, were considered critical. Mesopotamian texts frequently describe the motions of Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn in connection with divine events, interpreting their positions as reflections of cosmic will. Venus, in particular associated with the goddess Inanna, was considered a key to thresholds of transformation, its movement signaling moments of opportunity or danger. Jupiter, linked with order and kingship, could denote alignment with portals that reinforced societal stability, while Saturn, often associated with time and boundaries, marked thresholds that were more restrictive, requiring heightened ritual precision. By carefully observing these celestial bodies, the priesthood could predict, calculate, and coordinate the activation of gates, ensuring that interactions with unseen forces occurred under optimal conditions. The stars were also embedded directly into the architecture. Many temples feature carvings, mosaics, or inlaid objects that mirror the night sky, encoding both celestial positions and their corresponding effects on earthly thresholds. Some chambers were designed so that starlight penetrated through small apertures, striking specific symbols only at particular times of the year. These alignments allowed for a direct interaction between human action, temple design, and celestial influence, creating a tangible manifestation of cosmic order. Observing these phenomena, initiates could experience the sense of connection between the heavens and hidden chambers, understanding that the portals they approached were part of a larger, universal rhythm. Calendrical knowledge was integral to this process. The Mesopotamians maintained sophisticated lunar and solar calendars, dividing the year into months and seasons marked by celestial events. Festivals, sacrifices, and rituals were timed according to these calendars, ensuring that thresholds were engaged at moments when the flow of cosmic energy was strongest. For example, certain full moons were believed to amplify the effects of specific rituals, while eclipses and rare planetary conjunctions were interpreted as moments of heightened potential or heightened risk for accessing portals. The precision with which these observations were integrated into architecture, ritual, and daily life underscores the remarkable sophistication of Mesopotamian cosmology. Interestingly, the same celestial alignments that guided ritual also provided an early form of security. By encoding the timing and conditions for portal activation in star charts, calendars, and myths, the priesthood ensured that only those with advanced knowledge could safely interact with thresholds. An uninitiated individual, unaware of the precise moment or pattern, could mistakenly attempt a ritual, encountering forces they were unprepared to manage. This reinforces the recurring theme in Mesopotamian thought. Knowledge of thresholds, whether recorded in stone, water, or stars, demanded discipline, training, and reverence. Some myths even describe the stars themselves as sentient actors in the management of thresholds. They are depicted as observing, signaling, or guiding humans at critical moments, almost like participants in a ritual drama. In these narratives, the opening of a portal is not simply the result of human action, but a convergence of cosmic consent, celestial timing, and mortal skill. Stars, therefore, are both markers and participants, their movements of visible language that the initiated could read, interpret, and act upon. The Mesopotamian understanding of celestial alignment also emphasizes cycles of life, death, time, and spiritual passage. Portals were rarely intended for constant use. Their activation depended on cyclical phenomena that reflected natural and cosmic order. This cyclical approach reinforced a philosophy in which human life, ritual practice, and interaction with the divine were synchronized with universal patterns. By observing and participating in these cycles, humans could align themselves with forces that were otherwise invisible, learning not only when to act, but how to harmonize with the underlying rhythms of existence. Ultimately, the stars served as guides, warnings, and keys. They dictated the timing, illuminated the paths, and validated the rituals that activated the thresholds. The knowledge required to interpret their movements was vast, transmitted through apprenticeship, observation, and meticulous record-keeping. In combining celestial observation with temple architecture, ritual practice, and encoded inscriptions, the Mesopotamians created an integrated system in which the heavens and the earth worked in concert. Portals, thresholds, and gates were not abstract or metaphorical. They were intimately tied to the stars, responding to precise alignments that revealed the hidden currents of power flowing through the world. Through this interplay of sky and stone, light and shadow, human and divine, the Mesopotamians demonstrated an unparalleled understanding of connectivity between realms. The stars were not distant objects in a cold, empty sky. They were active participants in a network of thresholds, revealing moments when humans could bridge the visible and invisible worlds. They offered timing, guidance, and structure, allowing the priesthood and initiates to navigate the mysteries of the portals with skill, care, and awe. In this way, the heavens themselves became a map to the hidden architecture of the universe, a celestial code that, when interpreted correctly, could unlock the secrets buried beneath the marshes and sands of ancient Mesopotamia. Beneath the sun-baked plains and winding rivers of ancient Mesopotamia, there existed a network of hidden spaces that few mortals ever glimpsed. These were not mere storage rooms or simple basements, but vast subterranean chambers, tunnels, and pools that formed the backbone of the portals scattered across the region. To the ancients, the earth itself was alive, a living matrix through which hidden currents of water, energy, and cosmic influence flowed. The subterranean gateways were designed to tap into these currents, allowing mortals and deities alike to interact with forces that could not be accessed on the surface. The Sumerians, Akkadians, and later Babylonian civilizations built their temples, ziggurats, and ritual complexes with an extraordinary awareness of what lay beneath, constructing hidden corridors, circular pits, and chambers that often extended far beyond the visible structures above ground. These underground spaces were deliberately concealed and carefully structured. Entrances were often small, unassuming, or hidden behind carvings, emphasizing the exclusivity of access. Corridors twisted and turned, sometimes in labyrinthine configurations, making navigation a test of both memory and ritual knowledge. Within the chambers, pools and channels of water were precisely arranged to interact with light, sound, and ritual movement. Water was more than a symbol. It was a medium, a conductor of the forces that flowed through the thresholds. Reflections and currents were manipulated deliberately, creating effects that could guide initiates, illuminate sacred inscriptions, or even alter perception. In essence, these subterranean gateways were living systems, engineered to respond to careful human interaction. The construction of these underground spaces required not only architectural skill but an intimate understanding of geology and hydrology. Chambers were carved into bedrock, sometimes intersecting natural springs or underground streams. Basins and channels were integrated so that water flowed in patterns that mirrored cosmic or symbolic alignments. In some cases, the movement of water through these subterranean passages produced acoustic effects, echoes, resonances, or vibrations that were harnessed during rituals. These phenomena may have served multiple purposes, signaling the presence of a portal, guiding the steps of initiates, or creating a heightened sensory experience that reinforced the perception of crossing into a sacred threshold. Many subterranean gateways were also aligned with celestial events. Openings, apertures, and light shafts were positioned so that sunlight, moonlight, or starlight penetrated the chambers at precise times, illuminating carvings, basins, or objects placed within. These alignments were not accidental. They required generations of observation, planning, and experimentation. When the heavens and the earth converged in this way, the portals were thought to become fully active, their hidden energies accessible to those who knew the proper rituals. The combination of underground construction, water management, and celestial alignment created thresholds that were extraordinarily complex, integrating multiple layers of reality into a single experiential space. The rituals performed within subterranean chambers were intense and often perilous. Initiates were required to navigate dark corridors, moving with care while performing precise sequences of gestures, chants, and placements of ritual objects. Missteps could disrupt the energies of the portal or trigger unintended consequences. Texts and inscriptions emphasized that the gateways were not neutral. They carried forces that could bless, illuminate, or destroy, depending on the preparation and intention of those who approached. The priesthood trained extensively in these spaces, learning to read subtle signals, the shimmer of water, the movement of shadows, the resonance of echoes, that indicated the presence and readiness of a portal. Artifacts found in subterranean chambers reinforced the notion that these spaces were functional as well as symbolic. Figurines, tablets, basins, and carved objects were often arranged with extraordinary precision, corresponding to water channels, carvings, or celestial alignments. Some objects appear to have been deliberately placed to interact with the environment, reflecting light, amplifying sound, or guiding ritual flow. These arrangements suggest that Mesopotamian priests understood the subterranean chambers as complex systems, in which every object, every drop of water, and every movement contributed to the activation and stabilization of the portal. The subterranean gateways were also repositories of knowledge. Walls and floors were inscribed with symbols, instructions, and narratives that guided initiates in the rituals required to engage thresholds. Some inscriptions were partially hidden or obscured, accessible only to those with the requisite understanding, reinforcing the exclusivity of the knowledge and the importance of careful training. These inscriptions often combined myth, ritual instruction, and environmental cues into an integrated system, encoding information about celestial timing, water flow, architectural layout, and human action in a unified whole. In some accounts, the gateways were not merely symbolic thresholds but conduits for travel. Myths describe initiates, priests, or even deities moving through subterranean passages that connected distant temples, pools, or sacred sites. These narratives suggest that the ancients envisioned a hidden network beneath the surface, a lattice of portals capable of bridging great distances and linking cosmic, terrestrial, and human dimensions. While the literal truth of such journeys remains uncertain, the belief in their possibility underscores the profound significance attributed to subterranean gateways in Mesopotamian thought. Over centuries, many of these chambers were deliberately sealed, buried beneath later construction, or abandoned as cities rose and fell. The knowledge required to navigate and activate them was often restricted to a small elite, preserved through oral tradition and apprenticeship within the priesthood. Inscriptions caution that tampering or entering unprepared could bring disaster, a warning that reflects both practical concern and spiritual principle. The secrecy of the subterranean gateways ensured that their powers were safeguarded, their functions preserved, and their mysteries maintained across generations. Ultimately, the subterranean gateways represent a remarkable synthesis of architecture, ritual, observation, and spiritual understanding. They were spaces where water, stone, light, and human intention converged to create thresholds between worlds. They demanded discipline, knowledge, and reverence, reinforcing the principle that access to hidden forces was both a privilege and a responsibility. Through these underground chambers, the Mesopotamians engaged with the unseen currents of existence, constructing a tangible bridge between the surface world and the deeper layers of reality. In this way, the echoes beneath the earth were not simply physical sounds, but resonances of knowledge, ritual, and cosmic alignment, waiting to be discovered, interpreted, and experienced. Across the millennia, Mesopotamian myths preserved a rich tapestry of stories that both explained and obscured the nature of the portals and thresholds buried across the land. These narratives, often passed down orally before being committed to clay tablets, depict gods, demigods, and human initiates navigating hidden realms, crossing boundaries, and interacting with forces that ordinary mortals could scarcely imagine. Far from being mere entertainment, these stories functioned as guides, warnings, and repositories of knowledge, encoding the rules, dangers, and possibilities associated with thresholds. They reveal a civilization deeply preoccupied with the interplay between human courage, divine will, and the hidden currents of the universe. In these tales, the act of crossing a threshold was not a trivial matter. It was a journey demanding preparation, discipline, and respect, capable of bestowing knowledge, power, or calamity. One recurring theme in these myths is the motif of initiation. Heroes and priests alike were portrayed as undergoing trials, often in subterranean or otherworldly spaces, where they encountered guardians, puzzles, or tests of character. These narratives serve as allegorical maps of the portals themselves. The challenges faced by the protagonists mirrored the real dangers and requirements of engaging a threshold. Courage, wisdom, and purity of intention were repeatedly emphasized, suggesting that the ancients understood the gates as responsive systems, capable of rewarding skill and preparation while punishing carelessness or arrogance. For instance, tales describe initiates navigating labyrinthine passages, interpreting the signs of water, shadow, or sound to reach a sacred chamber. Failure meant disorientation, injury, or even death, underscoring the lethal seriousness of interacting with these hidden forces. The myths often depict gods and semi-divine beings using the portals as instruments of transformation. In some stories, deities pass between the heavens, the earth, and the underworld with ease, while humans who succeed in their trials are granted temporary access to these same paths. In one striking narrative, an initiate enters a chamber filled with reflective water, aligning themselves with celestial light to perceive the movements of distant stars. Through this act, they gain insight into cosmic cycles, the timing of floods, or the secrets of hidden currents beneath the earth. These tales reinforce the idea that portals were not purely symbolic. They were perceived as functional interfaces where knowledge, divine interaction, and natural phenomena converged. Many myths also emphasize the hazards of misuse. Narratives abound in which hubris, impatience, or ignorance leads to catastrophe. A priest who attempts to activate a threshold without proper ritual may be swept away by invisible forces or trapped within a subterranean corridor. A hero who ignores the timing of celestial alignment may encounter spirits, curses, or divine wrath. Such stories serve as encoded warnings, teaching that mastery over thresholds demanded not only technical knowledge but ethical discipline, humility, and reverence. In this way, mythology becomes a method of preserving practical wisdom, blending narrative, allegory, and instruction into a seamless whole. The gods themselves are frequently portrayed as custodians of thresholds, mediating between human initiative and cosmic forces. Deities such as Enki, Inanna, and Nergal appear in myths as teachers, testers, or regulators of access. Inanna, for instance, is often depicted journeying between worlds, negotiating gates, and demonstrating the principles of preparation, timing, and respect that humans were expected to emulate. These divine narratives mirror the practical operation of portals. Crossing a threshold requires understanding the laws of the system, aligning with cosmic rhythms, and adhering to a code of conduct that balances ambition with caution. The myths thus reinforce both spiritual and technical aspects of the thresholds, ensuring that knowledge was preserved within a framework of morality and cosmic order. Subterranean journeys are a particularly common motif. Heroes often descend into hidden chambers, underground rivers, or shadowed corridors, encountering spirits, guardians, or symbolic obstacles along the way. These journeys echo the actual layout of temple complexes and subterranean gateways, where corridors twist, chambers are hidden, and light or sound signals provide guidance. By embedding these experiences into myth, the ancients encoded both cautionary lessons and practical knowledge. They taught that navigating a portal required acute perception, attentiveness to environmental cues, and mastery of ritual sequences. In effect, the stories serve as a narrative overlay for the architectural and ritual knowledge preserved in stone, water, and temple design. Another striking feature of these myths is the interaction between temporal and eternal forces. Thresholds are depicted as liminal spaces, where time flows differently, where moments are charged with the presence of both mortality and eternity. In some tales, an initiate who spends hours navigating a hidden chamber emerges to find that days or years have passed above ground. In others, the portal allows vision into past or future events, glimpses of divine intent, or understanding of cosmic patterns. These elements underscore the perception of thresholds as spaces outside ordinary experience, where ordinary laws are suspended or reinterpreted. They also reinforce the notion that human perception, preparation, and discipline were crucial to safe and effective interaction. Finally, the myths often conclude with revelation and transformation. Success in navigating a threshold frequently results in enlightenment, the acquisition of knowledge, or communion with divine forces. Yet these rewards are always tempered by the understanding that such power is conditional and contingent upon respect for the system. The stories convey both awe and caution. The portals are extraordinary in potential, but they demand care, insight, and reverence. For the ancients, mythology was not mere entertainment. It was an encoded manual, a spiritual guide, and a warning system, preserving the wisdom of the thresholds across generations. Through these myths, the gates of Mesopotamia are brought vividly to life, revealing themselves not as inert relics of the past but as dynamic, interactive thresholds. They are spaces where humans could confront danger and wonder, where the material and immaterial intersect, and where preparation, courage, and cosmic alignment were necessary for passage. The stories of initiates and gods alike offer modern observers a window into a civilization that conceived of portals as both physical and spiritual realities, spaces of profound power, mystery, and transformative potential. In this way, the ancient myths serve as a bridge, connecting our understanding of Mesopotamia's temples, chambers, and thresholds to the lived imagination and sacred experience of those who walked the hidden paths millennia ago. Mesopotamia's legacy is etched not only in stone and temple architecture, but also in the countless clay tablets, inscriptions, and artifacts that have survived millennia of sand, water, and human history. These records were far more than administrative ledgers or literary works. They were repositories of knowledge, instruction, and encoded understanding designed to preserve and transmit the secrets of thresholds, portals, and hidden currents of power. From the moment a scribe pressed wedge-shaped symbols into wet clay, a record was being created that intertwined the practical with the mystical, the mundane with the cosmic. Each tablet was both a tool and a safeguard, a manual for the priesthood, a ledger of ritual precision, and a record that encoded access to forces that the uninitiated were forbidden to manipulate. The cuneiform inscriptions found throughout Mesopotamia often contain layers of meaning. Some tablets record the timing of celestial events, aligning stars and planets with the activation of portals. Others preserve ritual sequences, instructions for offerings, or directions for navigating subterranean chambers. Yet even within ostensibly straightforward texts, there are subtle references, symbols, or omissions that suggest a deeper, hidden layer of knowledge accessible only to trained initiates. These hidden instructions often relied on shared cultural understanding, oral transmission, or prior experience, emphasizing that the tablets themselves were not fully intelligible without the context of apprenticeship and guidance. In this way, knowledge was carefully guarded while still being recorded for posterity. Among the most remarkable finds are the so-called ritual compendiums, collections of tablets that detail elaborate ceremonies, hymns, and incantations associated with the thresholds. These texts are highly precise, specifying the sequence of chants, the placement of objects, the flow of water, and the alignment of celestial bodies. Some contain intricate diagrams, geometric patterns, or abstract symbols that correspond to temple architecture, subterranean chambers, or pools. These tablets reveal a worldview in which ritual, observation, and material arrangement were inseparable, and they suggest that the activation of a portal was as much a technical operation as it was a spiritual or symbolic act. Interestingly, many inscriptions employ language that seems intentionally enigmatic, filled with repetitions, ambiguities, and symbolic phrasing. Phrases may appear straightforward to an uninitiated reader, but encode instructions, cautions, or astronomical correlations recognizable only to those trained in the interpretive system. This deliberate obfuscation ensured that critical knowledge remained protected, accessible only to those who had undergone years of study and apprenticeship. In essence, the tablets functioned as both instruction and security measure, a written code that could guide a skilled practitioner while deterring misuse by the unprepared. Some tablets also contain narratives and mythological content intertwined with practical instruction. Stories of gods, demigods, and initiates navigating thresholds are often embedded alongside step-by-step ritual procedures. These mytho-ritual combinations serve multiple purposes. They preserve cultural memory, encode moral and ethical guidance, and provide mnemonic devices for remembering complex sequences of actions. By blending narrative with instruction, the Mesopotamians ensured that the knowledge could endure not only physically, in clay, but cognitively, within the memory and understanding of trained practitioners. Clay artifacts were not confined to the written word alone. Some tablets and figurines appear to have been designed for interaction within subterranean chambers or ritual spaces. In certain cases, symbols carved into a tablet correspond to features within a temple, specific basins, channels, or alcoves, suggesting that the objects themselves were functional, guiding the actions of initiates or marking important alignments. Others may have acted as tokens or keys, their placement, orientation, or presence required to complete a ritual correctly. In this sense, clay became an extension of the threshold itself, a tangible interface between human action, sacred space, and cosmic forces. The preservation of knowledge in clay also reflects a profound awareness of durability and legacy. Unlike organic materials that decay, clay tablets could survive centuries buried beneath sand, water, or collapsed structures, allowing the wisdom of Mesopotamia to endure far beyond the lifetime of any individual priest or initiate. The survival of these records speaks to the importance the civilization placed on continuity. Thresholds, portals, and the rituals associated with them were not ephemeral concerns, but enduring elements of a cosmology that demanded careful stewardship. Despite centuries of looting, destruction, and decay, thousands of tablets have been recovered, offering tantalizing glimpses into the lost knowledge of Mesopotamian thresholds. scholars continue to decode, interpret, and debate their meaning, revealing complex interconnections between ritual practice, celestial observation, architectural design, and moral instruction. Yet many mysteries remain, as much of the knowledge may have been intentionally hidden or lost over time, leaving gaps that spark both scholarly inquiry and imaginative speculation. The clay records also emphasize the ethical dimension of interacting with thresholds. Numerous inscriptions warn of dangers for the unprepared, death, madness, or the disruption of cosmic balance. In contrast, careful adherence to ritual, timing, and instruction promises insight, protection, and sometimes extraordinary experiences. This duality, risk and reward, pervades the tablets, reinforcing the idea that thresholds were not toys to be manipulated lightly but profound mechanisms requiring respect, knowledge, and discipline. In sum, the clay tablets and inscriptions of Mesopotamia provide a window into a civilization that meticulously preserved the interplay between human action, divine will, and hidden forces. They encode ritual, observation, and morality into tangible objects that could endure for millennia, ensuring that knowledge of the thresholds was passed from generation to generation. Through these records, we glimpse the sophistication of the priesthood, the dangers inherent in interacting with the portals, and the profound reverence with which the Mesopotamians approached the unseen currents of their world. Clay, in their hands, was not merely material. It was a medium through which humans could communicate with the divine, record the sacred, and safeguard the mysteries of thresholds that bridged the ordinary and the extraordinary. The Mesopotamian worldview was built upon the understanding that knowledge was power, but that not all knowledge was safe, nor should it be freely shared. Thresholds and portals, hidden beneath temples, ziggurats, and marshlands, were not neutral structures. They were conduits of immense and potentially dangerous forces. Accessing these gateways required more than curiosity. It demanded discipline, preparation, and respect for the boundaries established by both human and divine law. Texts, inscriptions, and myths repeatedly warn that misuse could bring disastrous consequences, ranging from physical harm to spiritual disorientation, and in extreme cases, permanent loss of life or sanity. The dangers associated with these thresholds were not abstract. They were perceived as real, immediate, and intimately linked to the moral and technical competence of the practitioner. The risks of mishandling a portal were multifaceted. Some inscriptions describe sudden, violent shifts in the environment, hidden currents of water rising unexpectedly, stone slabs shifting, or rooms filling with disorienting light and shadow. Others speak of invisible forces that could overwhelm the uninitiated, producing sensations of paralysis, suffocation, or even the terrifying impression of being drawn into another realm against one's will. In myths, heroes who entered chambers without proper preparation often disappeared, trapped within labyrinthine corridors, encountering guardians or spirits that would not release them until they had learned humility, obedience, or patience. The ancients clearly understood that thresholds were not static or passive. They were interactive, responsive, and capable of enforcing consequences when engaged improperly. Astronomical misalignment presented another danger. Celestial patterns were not merely ornamental. They served as timing mechanisms that ensured thresholds could be safely navigated. Approaching a portal outside of the prescribed timing could trigger unintended reactions. In extreme cases, texts imply that this might lead to collapse of subterranean chambers, disruption of ritualized energies, or even catastrophic cosmic imbalance. The priesthood therefore spent decades mastering star charts, planetary cycles, and lunar observations, understanding that human miscalculation could provoke forces far beyond ordinary comprehension. The heavens themselves were not indifferent. They were part of the system, enforcing order and punishing deviation. Psychological and spiritual consequences were equally feared. Rituals required prolonged concentration, fasting, isolation, and engagement with symbolic and sensory stimuli that could alter perception. An untrained or impatient individual could succumb to fear, hallucination, or disorientation, mistaking the natural echoes of subterranean chambers or the play of light and water for supernatural phenomena. Certain inscriptions explicitly warn that failure to follow sequences could lead to wandering of the soul, a term scholars interpret as disorientation within one's own consciousness. The Mesopotamians recognized that thresholds operated at the interface of the physical, spiritual, and psychological, and that negligence could produce effects that were both terrifying and real. Moral and ethical dimensions were inseparable from the technical ones. Tablets and myths consistently emphasized that thresholds demanded purity of intent. Greed, arrogance, or malicious curiosity could provoke forces designed to enforce balance. Stories abound of priests who sought personal gain rather than service, only to be swept away, trapped, or punished by divine or elemental forces. The gateways were as much tests of character as they were mechanisms of power, reflecting a worldview in which knowledge and responsibility were inseparably intertwined. Only those who demonstrated discipline, humility, and understanding could navigate the thresholds safely and benefit from the hidden wisdom they guarded. Some inscriptions suggest that the forces within portals were not always predictable. Even experienced priests occasionally reported unexpected phenomena. Water that flowed against expectation, chambers that appeared larger or smaller than measured, sounds that echoed in impossible ways. These anomalies reinforced the perception that thresholds were alive, responsive, and subtly intelligent, interacting with human intent, environmental conditions, and celestial alignment. The unpredictability added another layer of danger. Mastery was never absolute. Vigilance was always required, and complacency could prove fatal. The very act of interacting with a portal demanded constant attention, reverence, and adaptation. Certain tablets record severe punishments for transgression. These were not merely symbolic. They were instructions for safeguarding both the practitioner and the community. In extreme cases, failure to respect a threshold might lead to death, permanent spiritual disruption, or contamination of sacred spaces. The consequences of mismanagement were communal as well as personal, as the flow of unseen forces could impact entire temples or city districts. In this way, the danger was encoded into both ritual procedure and ethical framework, ensuring that thresholds were approached with care, expertise, and a profound respect for cosmic order. Interestingly, some myths described thresholds as selectively protective. They could recognize the intention, skill, and purity of the individual approaching them, granting safe passage to the prepared and denying access, or punishing those unworthy. This reinforces the notion that the gateways were interactive systems, operating according to principles that were as ethical as they were mechanical. The portals demanded a balance. Human action aligned with cosmic law, ritual precision matched with moral intent. Those who failed the balance faced immediate and tangible danger, while those who succeeded were rewarded with insight, protection, and sometimes profound transformative experiences. The Mesopotamian priesthood understood that danger and knowledge were inseparable. They developed rigorous training regimens, apprenticeship systems, and strict hierarchical control to minimize risk and preserve the integrity of the thresholds. Training could take decades, encompassing astronomical observation, ritual performance, moral instruction, and practical engagement with temple architecture and subterranean spaces. By imposing these structures, they ensured that the gateways were both powerful and controlled, accessible only to those capable of navigating the intricate web of risks, rituals, and celestial alignments. Ultimately, the thresholds of Mesopotamia embody the ancient principle that the pursuit of hidden knowledge is never without peril. They were physical, spiritual, and moral challenges, demanding preparation, discipline, and respect. Misuse could result in physical harm, psychological disorientation, or spiritual catastrophe, while proper engagement promised insight, transformation, and communion with forces beyond ordinary comprehension. The dangers were as integral to the system as the rewards, reinforcing a worldview in which knowledge and responsibility were inseparably linked, and where every action at the threshold carried weight. In contemplating the portals, one begins to understand that their power lay not only in the forces they mediated but also in the discipline they demanded. They were tests of courage, wisdom, and ethical integrity, preserved through millennia in stone, clay, myth, and ritual. To approach them was to confront both the extraordinary and the dangerous, to acknowledge that the hidden currents of the world were not neutral, and to accept that mastery of thresholds was a lifelong endeavor, requiring both skill and reverence. In this way, the Mesopotamian warnings resonate across time, reminding us that with knowledge comes responsibility, and with power comes consequence. Throughout Mesopotamia, the power of thresholds and portals was never left to chance. The ancients understood that such extraordinary forces required careful stewardship, and so they entrusted their protection to highly trained priests, guardians, and secret orders whose knowledge and discipline formed the backbone of this hidden system. These individuals were not merely religious functionaries. They were custodians of both practical and mystical knowledge, intermediaries between the mortal world and the forces flowing through the portals. Their lives were defined by rigorous study, ritual practice, and unwavering adherence to ethical codes designed to preserve balance and safeguard the community from the dangers inherent in interacting with thresholds. The training of these guardians was both intensive and prolonged. Apprenticeships could last decades, beginning with foundational instruction in cuneiform, temple architecture, and celestial observation. Initiates learned to read inscriptions, interpret symbols, and map subterranean spaces. They mastered rituals that involved complex sequences of gesture, chant, and object placement, often in coordination with precise astronomical timing. The goal was not only to gain technical skill but also to cultivate discipline, moral judgment, and spiritual awareness, ensuring that those who interacted with thresholds could do so safely and responsibly. Knowledge was layered, each stage building upon mastery of previous lessons, and failure at any point could have dire consequences. Guardians were also the ethical enforcers of portal use. Inscriptions, myths, and texts all emphasized that thresholds carried immense risk for those who approached with greed, arrogance, or negligence. Priests and protectors were charged with evaluating readiness, ensuring that only the disciplined and prepared could engage with the portals. This involved careful observation of ritual conduct, ethical integrity, and often personal character. Some accounts even suggest that guardians could sense disturbances in the subterranean energies or detect when an individual approached with ill intent, intervening to prevent potential catastrophe. In this way, they functioned as both instructors and enforcers, combining mentorship with protective oversight. Secret orders and priestly hierarchies played a crucial role in maintaining the continuity of knowledge. Certain temples and ziggurats were entrusted to specific lineages of priests, who preserved specialized instruction across generations. Texts, clay tablets, and ritual artifacts were transmitted carefully within these networks, often hidden or encoded to prevent misuse. Initiation into these orders was highly selective, emphasizing both ability and ethical alignment. The most advanced members gained access to subterranean chambers, celestial maps, and ritual sequences that were inaccessible to the broader community. The orders ensured that knowledge of the portals was not only preserved but safeguarded, preventing the disruption of cosmic and spiritual balance. Guardians were also responsible for coordinating complex rituals involving multiple participants. Portals were rarely activated by a single individual. Their operation often required precise collaboration among several priests, each performing a distinct function. This could involve timing gestures with celestial movements, positioning ritual objects in alignment with subterranean features, and maintaining chants or incantations in harmony. Any deviation could compromise the ritual, producing dangerous results. The collaborative nature of these practices reinforced hierarchy, discipline, and accountability, ensuring that knowledge of thresholds was exercised with both care and reverence. The guardians were intimately familiar with both the physical and mystical architecture of portals. They could navigate labyrinthine chambers, interpret subtle environmental cues, and manipulate water, light, and sound to activate thresholds. Some inscriptions suggest that certain priests were able to harmonize the movement of subterranean water with celestial alignment, producing resonances that amplified or stabilized the energies of a portal. Others could read subtle signs in reflections, shadows, or echoes, indicating the readiness of a threshold or signaling that a ritual was incomplete. The guardian's expertise was therefore both technical and intuitive, blending observation, skill, and spiritual sensitivity. Ethics and secrecy were inseparable in the life of a guardian. Knowledge without discipline was dangerous, and the consequences of misuse were severe. Guardians were often bound by oaths or ritualized vows, emphasizing loyalty, humility, and protection of sacred knowledge. The transmission of instruction was deliberate, cautious, and hierarchical, ensuring that novices advanced only as they demonstrated competence, integrity, and respect. In this way, the guardians acted as a living firewall, preserving thresholds while minimizing risk to themselves, the temple, and the wider community. Guardians also functioned as intermediaries between the community and the divine forces associated with portals. Their role extended beyond ritual performance to include interpreting signs, predicting celestial alignments, and advising on the timing of ceremonies or agricultural cycles. By doing so, they reinforced the perception that portals were both active and responsive, requiring human stewardship to maintain cosmic and societal order. Their authority was both spiritual and practical, a combination that granted them influence while underscoring their responsibility. Some myths suggest that these guardians themselves were tested by the thresholds they protected. Stories describe priests who spent years in subterranean chambers or isolated temples, gradually attuning to the forces flowing through the portals. Success brought profound insight, sometimes depicted as visions of the heavens, communion with deities, or mastery over subterranean currents. Failure, however, could be catastrophic, reinforcing the idea that guardianship was not merely a position but a rigorous discipline demanding skill, patience, and moral fortitude. Ultimately, the guardians of Mesopotamian thresholds embody the civilization's understanding of power and responsibility. They were scholars, technicians, spiritual practitioners, and ethical overseers, entrusted with the care of extraordinary forces whose misuse could imperil both individual and society. Through their knowledge, discipline, and dedication, they maintained the delicate balance between human curiosity and cosmic order, ensuring that the portals remained both potent and protected. Their legacy, preserved in inscriptions, myths, and the very architecture they oversaw, reminds us that access to hidden power is never free or casual. It requires vigilance, skill, and an unwavering respect for the forces one seeks to engage. The activation of a portal in ancient Mesopotamia was never a casual act. It was a highly orchestrated event, blending architecture, ritual, astronomy, and human intention into a single, precise performance. Each ceremony was a carefully choreographed interaction between the priesthood, the celestial movements, and the hidden energies flowing through subterranean chambers, thresholds, and temple spaces. The complexity of these rituals reflects the profound understanding the Mesopotamians had of both the physical and metaphysical dimensions of their world. A portal could only respond when all elements were aligned. The timing of celestial bodies, the positioning of ritual objects, the sequence of chants, and the movement of water and light all required exact precision. Even minor deviations could render the ceremony ineffective or dangerously unstable. Rituals began long before the portal itself was approached. Preparatory acts included fasting, purification, meditation, and study, designed to attune the participants' body, mind, and spirit to the forces they would encounter. Texts describe initiates entering ritual isolation, cleansing both physically and symbolically, and performing exercises intended to heighten awareness of subtle currents of energy. These preparatory acts were not merely ceremonial. They were considered essential for survival, helping practitioners synchronize with the rhythms of the threshold and the cosmos. Some tablets suggest that failure to properly prepare could result in disorientation, loss of consciousness, or even physical harm. The Mesopotamians clearly understood that the portal itself was responsive to human intention and readiness. The spatial arrangement of the ritual was equally critical. Chambers were organized according to sacred geometry, with pools, basins, altars, and inscriptions positioned to interact with light, water, and sound. Priests would move through these spaces in precise sequences, performing gestures and placing objects in alignment with the architecture. Water flowing through channels might reflect sunlight onto a symbol at a specific moment, while echoes produced by stone walls reinforced the sacred cadence of chants. The ceremonial choreography was meticulous, ensuring that every element of the ritual resonated harmoniously with the threshold's energy. Some inscriptions indicate that misalignment could cause the portal to sleep or become unstable, demonstrating the interactive and responsive nature of these hidden gateways. Chants and incantations formed a central part of the activation process. These were not mere prayers or recitations, but carefully structured sonic formulas designed to harmonize with both celestial and subterranean forces. Texts record sequences of sounds, syllables, and rhythms that could amplify or stabilize energies within the portal. The priesthood believed that spoken language had power, capable of structuring unseen forces and creating conditions necessary for safe passage. In some chambers, the combination of echoes, vibrations, and chant patterns may have produced sensory experiences, auditory, tactile, and even visual, that enhanced the perception of crossing into a liminal space. Sound, in this way, became both instrument and guide, bridging human action with cosmic resonance. Objects and tools were another essential component. Figurines, basins, inscribed tablets, and ritual implements were strategically positioned to guide or focus energies. Some objects appear to interact with light or water in precise ways, functioning as catalysts for the portal's activation. In certain cases, these artifacts were arranged according to celestial alignments, their placement synchronized with the rising or setting of stars and planets. Each item had a purpose, whether to channel energy, protect the practitioner, or mark a specific point in the ritual sequence. The meticulous use of material objects underscores the interplay between tangible and intangible forces in the Mesopotamian understanding of thresholds. Timing was perhaps the most critical element. Ceremonies were rarely performed at random. They were synchronized with celestial events, seasonal cycles, or lunar phases. Full moons, solstices, equinoxes, and planetary conjunctions were interpreted as windows of opportunity, moments when cosmic energies would naturally converge to facilitate the portal's activation. Tablets and inscriptions provide detailed instructions for observing the stars and planets, calculating precise moments for action, and coordinating multiple participants in ritual alignment. In this way, the activation of a portal was not merely local or isolated. It was a cosmic event, requiring careful synchronization of heaven, earth, and human endeavor. The interplay between water, light, and motion was also central to the ceremony. Many thresholds were situated over subterranean pools or channels, allowing reflections, currents, and ripples to interact with carved symbols and inscriptions. Light shafts, sometimes penetrating through carefully aligned apertures, would illuminate specific carvings only at precise moments. Movements of water, combined with gestures and chants, were believed to channel energy, revealing inscriptions, activating thresholds, or signaling that the ritual was proceeding correctly. Initiates were trained to read these subtle indicators, interpreting reflections, shifts in shadow, and resonances as guidance from the portal itself. Rituals could also involve multiple participants performing synchronized actions. The combination of human intention, gesture, chant, and object placement created a collective resonance, amplifying the energies within the chamber. Each participant had a defined role, and their coordination was essential for successful activation. Misalignment, hesitation, or incorrect timing could produce disruptive effects, emphasizing the importance of hierarchy, training, and attentiveness. The communal aspect reinforced both practical and spiritual control, ensuring that the threshold's power was accessed responsibly. The emotional and psychological effects of these ceremonies were profound. Participants often reported sensations of awe, disorientation, transcendence, or connection with forces beyond ordinary perception. The careful orchestration of light, water, sound, and movement could produce altered states of consciousness, creating the perception, or perhaps the reality, of crossing into another realm. In myths and inscriptions, these experiences were described as both transformative and dangerous, emphasizing that human readiness, courage, and ethical alignment were as important as technical precision. Ultimately, the rituals of activation reveal the extraordinary sophistication of Mesopotamian civilization. They were a seamless integration of architecture, astronomy, ritual, ethics, and sensory experience, designed to safely and effectively engage thresholds. Portals were not inert structures. They were responsive systems, interacting with human intention, cosmic timing, and material arrangements. The ceremonies demonstrate a civilization deeply attuned to the interconnection between the physical and spiritual worlds, recognizing that mastery over hidden forces required discipline, reverence, and intimate knowledge of the intricate networks of energy flowing through temples, chambers, and the cosmos. Through these rituals, the portals were transformed from inert thresholds into living conduits, mediating between humans and forces that were simultaneously physical, spiritual, and cosmic. The ceremonies codified centuries of observation, experimentation, and mythic tradition, ensuring that the knowledge could be transmitted safely and reliably across generations. In this way, Mesopotamia preserved not just portals themselves, but the wisdom, discipline, and reverence required to approach them, a legacy of human engagement with the hidden currents of existence, meticulously choreographed and profoundly transformative. Mesopotamian portals and thresholds were more than physical constructions. They were embedded with symbols, codes, and esoteric language designed to convey instructions, warnings, and hidden knowledge to those capable of interpreting them. These symbols were not merely decorative. They served as guides, protective mechanisms, and mnemonic devices, encoding complex information in ways that could only be understood by trained initiates or members of the priesthood. Every carving, bas-relief, or inscription was deliberate, often combining geometric patterns, mythological motifs, and abstract signs into a unified system of meaning. In essence, the thresholds themselves were a language, one that required not only literacy but intuition, experience, and ritual attunement to decipher. Some symbols were tied directly to the architecture of the portals. Geometric patterns, concentric circles, and interlocking shapes frequently marked key points along subterranean corridors or within ritual chambers. These designs often aligned with celestial events, water flow, or the placement of ritual objects, functioning as navigational aids and energy modulators. Initiates were trained to recognize how the symbols corresponded to physical spaces and ritual sequences, interpreting each line, curve, or angle as a component of a larger system. The inscriptions were thus simultaneously instructional, protective, and symbolic, integrating practical knowledge with spiritual guidance. Esoteric language extended beyond symbols to include coded cuneiform, mystical phrases, and layered meanings within texts. Some words were deliberately ambiguous, carrying dual or multiple interpretations that could only be understood in context or through oral instruction. Puns, homophones, and cryptic references were used to encode instructions for timing, ritual gesture, or placement of objects. This approach safeguarded knowledge, ensuring that the secrets of portals could not be accessed without proper preparation. The texts were simultaneously accessible and forbidden, readable in part but fully intelligible only to those initiated into the mysteries of thresholds. The use of myth as code was another pervasive technique. Stories of gods, heroes, and initiates often contained embedded instructions for navigating portals. For example, the journey of Inanna through the underworld could be read both as a moral narrative and as a guide to subterranean chambers, symbolically mapping steps, thresholds, and tests. Similarly, tales of Gilgamesh or Enki encoded sequences of ritual actions, timing cues, and environmental markers that directed practitioners in real-world portal interactions. Myth and instruction were intertwined, creating a multi-layered system of learning where narrative, ritual, and symbol merged into a single language. Visual codes were equally sophisticated. Carvings of animals, celestial objects, and ritual implements were positioned to correspond with the flow of energy through water channels, reflective surfaces, or light shafts. Initiates had to understand not only the symbolic meaning of the figures, but also how they interacted with their surroundings, producing effects that guided perception, enhanced ritual efficacy, or revealed hidden inscriptions. The physical environment was an extension of the code, with walls, floors, and objects forming an interactive, responsive matrix of information. Some inscriptions also indicate a temporal aspect to the symbols and codes. Certain carvings would only activate under specific conditions, such as a particular alignment of the sun or moon, or the flow of water through a channel at a designated time. This dynamic interaction between symbols, environment, and celestial timing created layers of meaning that changed with context, reinforcing the idea that thresholds were living systems. The esoteric language was therefore not static but responsive, requiring awareness, observation, and attunement to multiple factors to interpret correctly. Secrecy and protection were intrinsic to this system. The esoteric language acted as a safeguard, preventing misuse or accidental activation of portals by the uninitiated. Only those who had undergone years of apprenticeship, study, and ethical training could read and act upon the encoded instructions. This dual function, education for the prepared, protection against the unprepared, ensured that thresholds remained potent, controlled, and safe, maintaining the balance between human agency and cosmic forces. The interpretive skill required extended to auditory and sensory codes as well. Certain symbols indicated specific chant sequences, rhythmic gestures, or interactions with acoustic properties of the chamber. Subtle visual cues might correspond to sound resonance, water movement, or shadow patterns, creating an integrated sensory language. Initiates learned to read not just symbols but experiences, interpreting the environment as a living text where sight, sound, and motion conveyed instruction and guidance. In some cases, the codes also carried ethical and spiritual dimensions. Specific symbols signaled tests of character, cautioning against arrogance, greed, or impure intent. The thresholds themselves were sensitive to intention, and the coded instructions served as reminders that mastery of the portals required discipline, humility, and reverence. Knowledge and morality were inseparably linked, encoded in every line, curve, and symbol, reinforcing the principle that thresholds were not merely technical devices but living systems of interaction between humans, the environment, and cosmic forces. The sophistication of this symbolic language reflects a civilization that integrated observation, ritual, morality, and cosmic awareness into every aspect of portal design. Each corridor, chamber, and object became a component of a grand, interactive narrative, where symbols were active participants in the transmission of knowledge. To modern observers, these codes are tantalizing and enigmatic, suggesting a level of complexity in Mesopotamian spiritual and technical understanding that continues to inspire awe and speculation. Through symbols, codes, and esoteric language, the portals of Mesopotamia reveal themselves not merely as architectural or ritualistic phenomena, but as interactive systems of encoded knowledge. They were designed to guide, protect, instruct, and test, operating across visual, auditory, and symbolic dimensions. The language of thresholds reflects a civilization deeply attuned to the interplay between human action, ethical responsibility, and cosmic forces. A civilization that understood that true mastery of the hidden world required intellect, discipline, and reverence. Mesopotamia's thresholds and portals have long captivated scholars, archaeologists, and theorists, not only for their architectural and ritual sophistication, but for the tantalizing possibility that they were part of a hidden network of energy, knowledge, and influence. While the tangible remnants, temples, subterranean chambers, inscriptions, and artifacts provide concrete evidence of extraordinary craftsmanship and ritual practice, much of their true purpose remains shrouded in mystery. Ancient texts, myths, and archaeological clues suggest a system that transcended the ordinary functions of religious or civic life, hinting at a sophisticated understanding of natural and cosmic forces that modern observers are only beginning to grasp. One prominent line of speculation involves the use of energy flows, both physical and symbolic, within the portals. Water, light, and architectural geometry appear to have been deliberately integrated into thresholds in ways that could manipulate perception, enhance ritual effectiveness, or even generate subtle physical effects. Pools and channels of water may have conducted not only reflective light but vibrations, echoing sounds, or resonances that amplified ritual activity. Alignments with celestial events suggest that the ancients sought to harness cycles of planetary motion, star positions, and solar phenomena to synchronize human action with cosmic rhythms. In this context, thresholds may have functioned as more than spiritual gateways. They could have acted as nodes within a network designed to channel, focus, and transmit energies across both local and regional scales. Scholars and theorists have long debated the possibility that these thresholds represent a form of lost science, a technology encoded within ritual, architecture, and myth. While modern understanding cannot yet fully replicate these ancient effects, The careful integration of geometry, sound, water, and light indicates a system of knowledge far more sophisticated than previously acknowledged. The repetition of patterns, alignment of structures across different sites, and shared mythological motifs suggest an intentional transmission of this knowledge over centuries, preserved through apprenticeship, tablets, and encoded symbolism. In this way, the portals may reflect a convergence of empirical observation, spiritual insight, and practical experimentation, blurring the lines between science, ritual, and art. Another speculation concerns the connectivity of thresholds across Mesopotamia. Some myths and texts describe journeys between distant temples, underground passages linking separate ziggurats, or sacred sites aligned along celestial or terrestrial axes. This raises the possibility that the portals formed an integrated network, a lattice of hidden paths and conduits that connected places, people, and energies over vast distances. Such a network could have facilitated not only spiritual journeys or ritual coordination but also the preservation and transmission of knowledge. By situating portals in strategic locations, the priesthood may have created a system that allowed forces, whether symbolic, energetic, or cognitive, to flow across the landscape, influencing human activity, agriculture, and religious practice. The concept of thresholds as energy nodes is reinforced by the intricate design of ritual chambers and their associated artifacts. Basins, inscriptions, statues, and channels often interact in ways that imply careful manipulation of environmental factors: sound, light, water, and human movement. Some theorists suggest that these elements could have amplified collective consciousness, guided meditation, or even produced effects akin to altered perception or heightened awareness. While these claims remain speculative, the alignment of myth, ritual, and architecture implies that Mesopotamians perceived portals as functional systems with measurable outcomes, not simply symbolic structures. Lost knowledge is also evident in the cryptic nature of many inscriptions. Tablets, carvings, and esoteric language frequently encode instructions in ways accessible only to trained initiates, suggesting that advanced techniques, observations, or applications were deliberately restricted. This protective encoding ensured that thresholds could not be misused but also meant that much of the practical knowledge has been lost to history. Scholars today can interpret fragments, reconstruct rituals, and speculate about potential mechanisms, but the full extent of the Mesopotamians' understanding remains tantalizingly out of reach. The interplay of secrecy, ritual precision, and ethical oversight highlights the sophistication of a culture deeply attuned to the interplay between knowledge and responsibility. Some theories extend beyond the purely terrestrial, suggesting that portals were designed to interface with cosmic or metaphysical forces. Myths of gods, demigods, and initiates traveling between realms hint at an ancient conceptualization of thresholds as liminal spaces bridging different dimensions of existence. While modern science cannot confirm these journeys, the consistent inclusion of celestial alignment, timing, and sacred geometry in portal construction implies that the ancients perceived a deep connection between earthly and cosmic processes. Thresholds may have functioned as calibrated points where human action, spiritual intent, and cosmic patterns converged, creating experiences that could be transformative, instructive, or protective. The implications of such a hidden network are staggering. If thresholds were part of an interconnected system, carefully calibrated to interact with natural, celestial, and human energies, then Mesopotamia possessed a level of sophistication that resonates with both technological and spiritual ingenuity. This raises profound questions. How much knowledge was lost over millennia? How much of human understanding of energy, consciousness, and ritual has roots in these ancient systems? Could there have been methods or mechanisms that allowed humans to influence their environment, perception, or destiny in ways that we are only beginning to understand? Theories of a hidden network also intersect with speculation about social and political control. Thresholds were carefully guarded, rituals tightly regulated, and knowledge transmitted hierarchically. This suggests that portals were not only spiritual instruments but instruments of influence, allowing the priesthood to coordinate, guide, and protect communities. The integration of energy, ritual, and societal structure highlights the sophistication of Mesopotamian civilization, where technology, spirituality, and governance were intertwined in ways that appear remarkably advanced for their time. Ultimately, the lost science, hidden energies, and networked thresholds of Mesopotamia represent a convergence of observation, ritual, and imagination. They remind us that our ancestors perceived the world as a complex system of interconnections, where architecture, water, light, sound, and human intention could be harnessed to interact with forces beyond ordinary comprehension. The portals were not passive relics. They were active, responsive, and profoundly sophisticated systems, carefully calibrated to balance human knowledge, cosmic alignment, and ethical responsibility. The more we explore their mysteries, the more we realize how much of our own history, science, and spirituality may be entwined with these hidden networks, waiting to be rediscovered. The stories of initiates navigating Mesopotamia's hidden thresholds are among the most tantalizing remnants of ancient knowledge, blending myth, ritual, and historical speculation into narratives that continue to inspire awe and wonder. These tales describe individuals, priests, apprentices, and select members of secret orders, who undertook journeys through subterranean chambers, temple complexes, and other liminal spaces, often guided by cryptic symbols, tablets, and celestial alignments. Their experiences were simultaneously practical and mystical. They were tests of skill, courage, and ethical integrity, as well as journeys that brought initiates face-to-face with forces that defied ordinary perception. In many ways, these stories illuminate the human dimension of Mesopotamian thresholds, showing how knowledge, discipline, and determination were interwoven with the extraordinary power of the portals themselves. One recurring theme in the tales of initiates is the motif of trial and mastery. Initiates often faced a series of challenges designed to test their observation, timing, and comprehension. Some were required to navigate labyrinthine corridors where a single misstep could lead to disorientation or physical danger. Others had to interpret reflections in water, patterns of light, or resonances of sound to identify the correct sequence of actions. These challenges were not arbitrary. They mirrored the operational logic of the portals themselves, reinforcing the idea that thresholds were interactive systems responsive to human intention and skill. Success brought access, insight, and spiritual elevation, while failure carried real risk. Celestial timing was an essential element in many of these journeys. Initiates were trained to observe the movement of stars, planets, and the moon, coordinating their actions with moments of alignment, solstice, or equinox. Tablets and inscriptions provided guidance, but personal skill and discernment were crucial. Many narratives describe initiates waiting in isolation for hours or days, attuning their senses to subtle shifts in light, shadow, or sound that signaled the readiness of the portal. The patience and discipline required were as important as technical skill, reinforcing the dual focus on practical mastery and ethical preparation. The journeys were also transformative in a spiritual sense. Initiates frequently reported experiences of awe, expanded awareness, or encounters with divine or semi-divine beings. In myths, these encounters are depicted as moments of profound revelation, where the initiates glimpsed hidden truths, understood the workings of cosmic order, or received guidance for the application of sacred knowledge. Some tablets hint that these experiences were enhanced by the architecture of the thresholds, the flow of water, the resonance of sound, and the careful alignment of ritual objects. In effect, the portals themselves became instruments of perception, amplifying human consciousness and mediating experiences that transcended ordinary reality. Ethical trials were deeply embedded in these journeys. Initiates were constantly tested for humility, honesty, and respect for the forces they engaged. Tales frequently recount individuals who attempted shortcuts, acted out of greed, or failed to adhere to ritual requirements, only to be met with misfortune, disorientation, or spiritual dissonance. Success was reserved for those who demonstrated both skill and moral alignment, highlighting the Mesopotamian principle that access to hidden knowledge required integrity as well as technical competence. The thresholds were not neutral. They evaluated human intention as much as action. Subterranean and hidden chambers played a crucial role in these journeys. Initiates often moved through spaces designed to manipulate perception, corridors that twisted light, echoing chambers that amplified sound, and reflective pools that revealed inscriptions or signals only at precise moments. These architectural features were not mere embellishments. They functioned as integrated components of the portals, guiding, testing, and regulating human interaction. Initiates had to learn to read these subtle cues, interpreting physical phenomena as both instructions and indicators of spiritual alignment. Mastery of the journey depended on acute awareness of both environment and ritual, blending observation, intuition, and discipline. Some tales also describe journeys between distant portals or sacred sites, suggesting that thresholds may have been part of a broader network connecting temples, ziggurats, and hidden chambers. Initiates who undertook such extended journeys were often described as traversing rivers, underground passages, or symbolic landscapes, guided by celestial observation, mythic narratives, or encoded instructions. These stories hint at an integrated system of knowledge and energy, where thresholds acted not only as local conduits but as nodes within a regional or even cosmic network. The journeys of initiates were therefore simultaneously physical, symbolic, and metaphysical. The stories also preserve a sense of risk and danger that underscores the seriousness of the initiate's work. Physical hazards, collapsing structures, sudden water surges, or hidden pits, intertwined with psychological and spiritual challenges. Initiates had to maintain focus, composure, and ethical clarity under conditions that could produce fear, confusion, or hallucination. Their journeys demanded courage and resilience, emphasizing that mastery of thresholds was as much about personal fortitude as technical skill. Each successful passage became a testament to human perseverance, discipline, and alignment with cosmic and ethical principles. Interactions with guardians, priests, or secret order members were integral to these journeys. Initiates often progressed under the supervision of more experienced practitioners, who provided guidance, correction, and protection. These mentors helped novices interpret symbols, observe celestial timing, and execute rituals correctly, ensuring both safety and proper transmission of knowledge. The stories emphasize the relational aspect of mastery. Knowledge was rarely solitary, and success depended on community, mentorship, and adherence to shared ethical and ritual codes. Ultimately, the tales of initiates navigating Mesopotamia's thresholds are stories of human engagement with the extraordinary. They reveal a civilization that integrated architecture, ritual, celestial observation, ethics, and psychology into experiences of profound complexity and consequence. Through these narratives, we glimpse the lives of those who dared to confront hidden forces, balancing skill, courage, and morality to access realms of knowledge and power. The journeys are both literal and metaphorical, illustrating the interplay of preparation, intention, and interaction with forces beyond ordinary comprehension. These lost journeys continue to fascinate, offering modern observers a window into a system that combined technical precision, spiritual insight, and ethical rigor. The initiate stories highlight the delicate balance required to navigate thresholds. Mastery demanded knowledge, discipline, and reverence, while missteps carried real and often dire consequences. They remind us that ancient portals were more than architectural curiosities. They were dynamic, interactive spaces that tested the full measure of human capability, courage, and moral alignment, leaving behind a legacy that resonates across millennia. The experiences of initiates who successfully navigated Mesopotamia's hidden thresholds offer some of the most fascinating insights into the civilization's understanding of knowledge, power, and human potential. These journeys were not merely tests of skill or ritual precision. They were transformative events that reshaped perception, consciousness, and understanding. Initiates reported encounters that transcended ordinary sensory experience, revealing truths encoded in the architecture, the symbols, and the rituals of the portals. The revelations they received were as much about themselves as about the hidden forces they engaged, blending ethical instruction, spiritual insight, and practical mastery into an integrated framework of comprehension that was both extraordinary and deeply human. One of the most striking aspects of these experiences was the heightened perception of interconnectedness. Initiates frequently described sensing a resonance between their actions, the environment, and the larger cosmos. Movements of water, reflections of light, the vibration of sound, and alignment with celestial bodies appeared to respond to human intention, creating the perception that the thresholds were alive, responsive, and intelligent. These interactions were not passive observations. They were dynamic engagements requiring careful timing, ethical intent, and focused attention. In effect, the portals became mirrors reflecting both cosmic order and human alignment, revealing how individual action could influence and be influenced by the hidden currents of the world. The revelations often carried profound ethical and philosophical lessons. The thresholds acted as tests of character, measuring humility, courage, discipline, and integrity. Initiates who approached with arrogance or greed faced disorientation, danger, or failure, while those who demonstrated respect, patience, and ethical mindfulness were rewarded with insight. Inscriptions and myths suggest that the portals communicated these lessons subtly, through environmental cues, symbolic signals, and ritual outcomes. The experience of crossing a threshold was therefore not only a technical achievement but a moral and spiritual awakening, reinforcing the inseparability of knowledge and responsibility in Mesopotamian thought. Spiritual insight was another key aspect of the revelations. Initiates often reported experiences that could only be described as mystical or transcendent. Encounters with deities, semi-divine entities, or manifestations of cosmic principles were described in both texts and myth. Some tablets hint that these experiences conveyed guidance on the use of knowledge, the alignment of human will with cosmic order, or the management of hidden energies. The portals functioned as conduits not only between physical spaces, but between planes of understanding, facilitating experiences that integrated sensory perception, intuition, and ethical comprehension into a cohesive revelation. Transformations also extended to practical understanding. Initiates acquired knowledge of celestial timing, ritual sequences, architectural interactions, and environmental manipulation that could be applied to portals, thresholds, and other sacred or functional sites. The lessons learned were highly context-specific, emphasizing observation, experimentation, and iterative learning. Knowledge was rarely abstract. It was embedded in practice, encoded in experience, and verified through careful engagement with thresholds and their responsive systems. This approach ensured that the power of the portals was not misused and that understanding remained connected to discipline and ethical alignment. Psychological transformation was equally significant. Initiates often emerged from these journeys with a heightened sense of awareness, discipline, and emotional regulation. The thresholds demanded focus, patience, and resilience, training the mind to navigate complexity, ambiguity, and potential danger. Tales describe individuals who gained extraordinary problem-solving skills, improved capacity for observation, and an enhanced understanding of cause and effect within both natural and ritualized systems. In many ways, the thresholds acted as intense crucibles of mental, emotional, and spiritual refinement, forging qualities that were as valuable as the knowledge they conveyed. The revelations also emphasized the principle of hidden knowledge. Many insights were conveyed indirectly, through symbolism, interaction with environmental cues, or layered narratives, rather than straightforward instruction. Initiates were required to interpret, synthesize, and apply what they observed, reinforcing critical thinking, intuition, and personal judgment. The portals taught that understanding was not given. It was earned through engagement, reflection, and ethical alignment. This approach preserved the sanctity and potency of thresholds, ensuring that their power was wielded responsibly and effectively. Transformation often included a sense of interconnected time and history. Initiates perceived themselves as part of a continuum, linked to generations of guardians, priests, and previous seekers who had maintained the thresholds and transmitted knowledge. Tablets, inscriptions, and architectural features acted as temporal anchors, connecting the present journey to past discoveries, mistakes, and wisdom. The experience underscored the responsibility to preserve knowledge, respect tradition, and act in ways that would safeguard both the thresholds and the broader community. The portals were simultaneously personal, societal, and cosmic tests, revealing the layered consequences of human action. Many initiates also reported an expanded sense of purpose or vocation. Having encountered forces and insights beyond ordinary perception, They returned with a deeper understanding of their role within society, temple, or secret order. Knowledge of celestial alignment, ritual activation, and ethical stewardship was not merely personal. It was a responsibility to guide others, protect thresholds, and maintain cosmic balance. The transformative journey instilled a sense of stewardship, linking mastery of hidden forces with ethical and societal accountability. Ultimately, the revelations and transformations experienced by initiates illustrate the profound sophistication of Mesopotamian thresholds. They were not static structures but dynamic, responsive systems that engaged mind, body, spirit, and environment in a unified experience. The journeys produced knowledge, ethical insight, spiritual awakening, and personal transformation, demonstrating that the portals were designed to elevate human understanding while simultaneously protecting both the practitioner and the broader order of the world. Through these transformative experiences, the Mesopotamians created a civilization in which knowledge, ethics, and cosmic awareness were inseparable. The thresholds were more than physical or ritual constructs. They were catalysts for personal and collective awakening, teaching that mastery of hidden forces demanded preparation, discipline, ethical alignment, and reverence. The legacy of these revelations persists, offering modern observers a glimpse of a worldview in which human action, spiritual insight, and cosmic order intersected in ways that continue to inspire awe, curiosity, and deep reflection. The Last Stargate of Mesopotamia stands not just as a relic, but as a symbol of mystery, power, and the human pursuit of knowledge. Its worn stones and cryptic inscriptions whisper of initiates, guardians, and rituals designed to engage with forces beyond ordinary perception. While archaeology reveals fragments of its structure, the Stargate's full function remains hidden, encoded in symbols, architecture, and esoteric practice. It is both a physical threshold and a spiritual conduit, a system that demanded skill, discipline, and ethical alignment from those who approached it. Legends suggest that the Stargate was more than a doorway. It may have been part of a network linking sacred sites, capable of channeling energy, knowledge, or influence across the land. Celestial alignments, water channels, and encoded symbols hint at a sophisticated understanding of environmental and cosmic forces. Initiates who crossed its thresholds reportedly encountered revelations that transformed perception, blending practical mastery with spiritual insight. The portal was a teacher as much as a gateway, guiding its users toward both knowledge and ethical responsibility. Its enduring allure lies in what remains hidden, the balance of skill, courage, and reverence required to engage with its power. Modern explorers, theorists, and artists are drawn to the Stargate not only for its historical significance but for its philosophical implications. It challenges us to reflect on human ambition, the limits of knowledge, and the ethical stewardship required when engaging with forces larger than ourselves. Though largely silent today, the Stargate continues to inspire wonder, asking us to imagine thresholds beyond perception and reminding us that some mysteries endure because they demand growth, humility, and insight. The Stargate's legacy extends far beyond Mesopotamia's ruins, resonating across history, imagination, and human curiosity. Though its mechanics remain partially lost, the portal continues to inspire awe, offering insights into ancient mastery of architecture, ritual, and cosmic alignment. Modern researchers glimpse a civilization capable of integrating geometry, light, water, and sound into interactive systems, demonstrating technical skill, spiritual understanding, and ethical oversight. Its presence challenges assumptions about human capability and the sophistication of ancient science. Beyond technical marvels, the Stargate endures as a symbol of the human journey, curiosity tempered by discipline, knowledge balanced by responsibility. Initiates who navigated its thresholds reported transformations in perception, morality, and awareness, gaining insights that were as ethical and philosophical as they were practical. The portal's design intertwined human action, environmental cues, and cosmic timing, reflecting a worldview in which mastery demanded alignment with both natural and moral order. Even in absence, the Stargate provokes reflection. It asks what thresholds exist in our own lives, testing our courage, patience, and ethical clarity. Its influence stretches into myth, literature, and imagination, inspiring modern interpretations of portals, liminal spaces, and hidden knowledge. The enduring lesson is timeless. True understanding requires preparation, humility, and reverence. The Stargate remains a bridge between past and present, tangible structure and eternal idea, reminding us that the pursuit of discovery is inseparable from ethical responsibility, and that the mysteries of history continue to illuminate the potentials and limits of human ambition. The ultimate legacy of the Last Stargate of Mesopotamia lies in the questions it leaves behind. Beyond stone, inscriptions, and ritual, it symbolizes human curiosity, courage, and the pursuit of understanding. Its thresholds were designed not only to test skill but to demand ethical alignment, humility, and patience. Knowledge and power were inseparable, and mastery required both discipline and reverence. The Stargate continues to inspire imagination. Archaeologists study its architecture and celestial alignments, historians interpret its encoded symbols, and artists envision the journeys of initiates who once crossed its thresholds. Its lessons extend beyond history. True understanding requires ethical responsibility and careful engagement with forces larger than ourselves. Silent yet enduring, the Stargate challenges us to reflect on the limits of perception, the responsibilities of knowledge, and the courage to face the unknown. It is a timeless testament to human potential, the pursuit of wisdom, and the mysteries that remain waiting for those prepared to engage with them.